Hello guys, welcome to Soul Fiction. So in this video, we will see what if Naruto had the power of Godzilla? Naruto x harem. Summary. The nine-tailed fox was never sealed into Naruto. Instead, Jiraiya and Minato, during a desperate ritual to save the newborn from a mysterious ailment, accidentally tapped into a primordial ley line, sealing a far more ancient and powerful entity into him. Gojira, the primordial king of balance. This being is not a creature of pure chakra like a biju, but a force of nature itself. Consequently, Naruto's chakra is a unique, hyper-dense, radioactive energy, the atomic chakra. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The king's roar. The air in the Konoha Ninja Academy classroom was thick with the nervous sweat and cloying anticipation of children on the precipice of their lives. Iruka Amino, a man whose kindness was as much a feature as the scar across his nose, stood before them, a stack of papers in his hand that felt heavier than any scroll of forbidden jutsu. He cleared his throat, the sound quieting the last of the excited whispers. "All right. Settle down everyone. First of all, congratulations on passing your final exams. From this day forward, you are no longer students, but full-fledged shinobi of Konohagakure." A wave of proud, if slightly ragged, cheers went through the room. Iruka smiled, a genuine, warm expression. "Now, for the formation of your three-man or in some cases, four-man squads." The tension snapped back into place, tighter than a bowstring. This was the moment that would define their careers, their friendships, their very survival. Names were called, teams were formed. Kiba Inuzuka whooped as he was paired with Shino Aburame and Hinata Hyuga, the latter of whom offered a shy, hopeful glance towards the back of the room before shrinking under Kiba's boisterousness. The Ino Shika Cho trio was announced, a legacy renewed, met with a theatrical sigh from Shikamaru Nara and a triumphant fist pump from Ino Yamanaka. Ino's eyes, a stunning shade of cerulean, immediately darted across the room to her rival. "Looks like you're still on the market, billboard brow. Hope you don't get stuck with, well, you know." Sakura Haruno bristled, her hands clenching in her lap. "Shut up, Ino pig. At least I'm not stuck with a lazy bum and She trailed off, unable to insult Choji Akamichi without feeling guilty. Her own anxiety was a frantic butterfly in her stomach. Her gaze drifted towards the object of her affection, Sasuke Uchiha, who sat cool and aloof, ignoring everyone. Then, her eyes, like everyone else's, inevitably slid to the figure beside him. Naruto Uzumaki. He wasn't like the other boys. While they fidgeted or postured, he simply existed, a point of stillness in the chaotic room. He sat with his back straight, hands resting on his knees, his gaze fixed on the window, watching a leaf spiral to the ground. He hadn't said a word all morning, he rarely did. His silence wasn't shy. It was heavy, ancient. His presence was a physical thing, a subtle pressure in the air that made you stand up a little straighter, speak a little quieter. The vibrant orange jumpsuit of his younger years was gone, replaced by a simple, practical outfit of black shinobi pants, a dark gray long-sleeved shirt, and a black flak jacket devoid of any insignia. The only color on him was the shock of his sun-blonde hair and the impossible blue of his eyes, which, when they turned on you, seemed to see through skin and bone to the trembling soul within. He was the undisputed top of their class, a prodigy whose scores in every metric ninjutsu, taijutsu, genjutsu, intelligence were so far beyond the rest that they might as well have been on a different scale. He never boasted. He never had to. His power was a known fact, a fundamental truth of their generation. When he sparred, it was with the instructors, and even they tread carefully. The other students didn't challenge him. They watched him, learned from him, and kept a respectful distance. He was their alpha, their walking, breathing benchmark for what a shinobi could be. Team 7, Iruka's voice cut through the tension, and the room held its breath. "Will be Sakura Haruno." Sakura's heart leapt. "Yes." "Sasuke Uchiha." Sasuke didn't react, but a flicker of something interest, perhaps, showed in his dark eyes. He was being paired with the only two people who might not drag him down, and Naruto Uzumaki. A collective sigh of relief and envy went through the room. Sakura's elation curdled into a knot of apprehension. To be on a team with Sasuke was a dream come true. To be on a team with Naruto was terrifying. It was like being told you'd be partners with a tamed typhoon. Ino shot her a look that was a complex cocktail of jealousy, pity, and grudging respect. Sasuke glanced at Naruto, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. It wasn't the glare of a rival so much as the look one apex predator gives another when they find themselves sharing territory. Naruto, for his part, finally turned his gaze from the window. His eyes swept over Sakura, then Sasuke, a slow, deliberate assessment that made Sakura feel like a specimen under a microscope. He offered a minuscule nod, a gesture that somehow conveyed both acceptance and expectation, before turning his attention back to Iruka. "Your Jonin instructor," Iruka continued, feeling a bead of sweat trickle down his temple as he met Naruto's gaze, "will be Kakashi Hatake. This is a special assignment, approved by the Hokage himself. You'll meet him after lunch on the roof." He finished the last of the assignments, but the energy of the room had already shifted, focused entirely on the powerhouse team that had just been created. Team 7 wasn't just another genin squad, it was a statement. The sun was high and hot when Sakura and Sasuke found themselves on the academy roof. Sasuke leaned against the railing, radiating his usual brand of cool indifference. Sakura fidgeted, constantly smoothing down her dress, her mind racing. An hour passed. Then 2. "He's late," Sakura finally grumbled, her frustration boiling over. What kind of elite jonin shows up 2 hours late to meet his new team? Sasuke just grunted. But then, a subtle shift in the air made the hairs on his arms stand up. The space behind them, empty a second ago, now held a man. He was tall and lean, with a shock of silver hair that defied gravity and a mask that covered the lower half of his face. His visible eye was lazy, half closed, and fixed on a small orange book in his hand. "Yo," Kakashi Hatake said, his voice maddeningly casual. "You're late," Sakura shrieked, pointing an accusing finger. Sorry. A black cat crossed my path, so I had to take the long way," he offered, his eye curving into a shape that suggested a smile. It was the flimsiest excuse she'd ever heard. Before she could protest further, another voice, calm and quiet, spoke from the other side of the roof. "No, you didn't." All 3 of them turned. Naruto was sitting on the edge of the roof, his legs dangling over the side, seemingly unfazed by the 100-foot drop. He hadn't been there a moment ago. There had been no sound, no flicker of movement. He was just there. "You spent an hour and 47 minutes at the memorial stone," Naruto continued, his voice devoid of accusation, a simple statement of fact. "Then you stopped at a dango shop for 12 minutes before taking a leisurely, 17-minute stroll here." Kakashi's visible eye widened almost imperceptibly. He slowly closed his book with a soft snap. My, and how would you know that?" Naruto tapped his temple. "The air remembers where you've been. The scent of ozone from the stone, the sweet smell of the dango, the dust from the side streets. It all clings to you." He turned his head, and his blue eyes elked onto Kakashi's. "And your chakra flow is agitated. You're not as relaxed as you pretend to be." A heavy silence descended. Sakura and Sasuke stared, dumbfounded. It wasn't just the impossible deduction. It was the way he said it. He had stripped Kakashi's entire persona away in 3 sentences. Kakashi's lazy demeanor evaporated, replaced by something sharper, more focused. He straightened up, his gaze analytical. The Hokage's warnings had not been exaggerated. This was no child. "Well now," Kakashi said, his voice losing its playful edge, "aren't you an interesting bunch? Let's head to Training Ground 7. We have one final test before you officially become my students. A little bell test. And I'd recommend not skipping breakfast. You might need it." His eye glinted. "Or you might just puke it up." Training Ground 7 was a place of ghosts and memories for Kakashi. It was where his own team Minato had been formed. Now, it was the stage for this new, volatile team. He stood before them in a sun-dappled clearing, holding up 2 small silver bells. "All right, here's the deal," he said, the bells tinkling musically. "Your objective is to take these bells from me before noon. Those who succeed get to eat the bento lunches I brought. Those who fail," he gestured to 3 wooden stumps, "get tied to a post and watch me eat my lunch in front of you." Sakura's stomach rumbled. "Wait, but there are 3 of us, and only 2 bells." "Exactly," Kakashi said, his eye curving into that infuriating smile again. That means at least one of you will be going back to the academy. Of course, all three of you could fail as well. You have until the timer goes off. You can use any weapons or jutsu you like. Come at me with the intent to kill, or you won't stand a chance. He set an egg timer on one of the posts. Ready? Begin. In a puff of smoke, Sakura and Sasuke vanished, just as they'd been taught. Kakashi scanned the clearing. Naruto hadn't moved. He stood exactly where he was, his hands in his pockets, his blue eyes watching Kakashi with unnerving calm. What's wrong? Kakashi taunted. Big shot prodigy too cool to hide. No, Naruto said simply. I'm observing. Kakashi raised a curious eyebrow. Observing what? You, Naruto replied. Your stance. Your breathing. The way your chakra shifts when you activate your Sharingan, which you're already doing. I'm learning everything I need to know about you before I make my move. Kakashi felt a genuine chill. This kid wasn't just powerful, he was a frighteningly efficient combat analyst. He decided to ignore the boy for now and focus on the easier prey. The next hour was a blur of classic genin tactics met with effortless jonin superiority. Sakura fell for a simple genjutsu, seeing a horribly wounded Sasuke that sent her into a screaming faint. Sasuke, for all his Uchiha pride and talent, found himself outmatched. His fireball jutsu was countered by a simple earth wall. His taijutsu was dodged with contemptuous ease. Kakashi eventually buried him up to his neck, lecturing him about being an avenger, who was easier to read than his favorite book. Throughout it all, Naruto remained unseen. Kakashi knew he was out there, a silent, watching presence. It was more unsettling than any direct attack. He could feel it, a subtle pressure on the edge of his senses, like the feeling of being watched by a panther in the deep jungle. With the timer half gone, Kakashi leaned against a tree, reopening his Ika Ika Paradise novel. Come on out, Naruto. Are you just going to let your teammates fail? The only reply was the rustle of leaves. But Kakashi felt it again, a shift. Not a sound, not a flicker of chakra, but a change in the very density of the air behind him. He spun around, kunai in hand, just as Naruto's foot connected with his forearm. The impact was staggering. It wasn't the sharp sting of a genin's kick. It was a solid, crushing force, like being struck by a falling tree. A shockwave traveled up Kakashi's arm, making his bones hum and his teeth ache. He was thrown back several feet, skidding to a halt. He stared at his forearm, which was already purpling into a deep bruise. What kind of monstrous strength is that? Naruto stood where Kakashi had been a moment before. He hadn't used a substitution or a flicker technique. From what Kakashi could tell, he had just moved. He moved with a predatory grace that was both beautiful and terrifying, his body flowing like water, yet striking like stone. All right. Playtime's over, Kakashi said, tucking his book away. He lifted his headband, revealing the crimson, three-tomo Sharingan. Let's see what you're really made of. Naruto tilted his head. You rely on that eye too much. It drains you. It's a tool, not a solution. He came forward again, not in a rush, but in a controlled, deliberate advance. Kakashi, with his borrowed eye, could see the flow of chakra, the twitch of muscle, the path of the attack. He was ready. He was wrong. Naruto's first punch was a feint. His second was a blur. Kakashi ducked under it, but Naruto's knee was already coming up, aimed at his chest. Kakashi twisted, deflecting it with his elbow, and the impact sent a jarring crack through the air. The ground beneath Naruto's standing foot fractured into a spiderweb of cracks. This wasn't taijutsu. This was controlled demolition. They exchanged a flurry of blows. To an outside observer, it was a dizzying dance of black and silver. But for Kakashi, it was a desperate struggle for survival. Every block sent a tremor through his body. Every dodge was a hair's breadth from disaster. Naruto wasn't just strong, he was relentless, a force of nature. His movements were perfectly efficient, with no wasted energy. The Sharingan could predict his attacks, but his sheer speed and power made countering them a monumental effort. Naruto disengaged, leaping back and landing silently on a branch. You can't win this way, sensei. Your stamina is depleting. Your eye is a crutch. And you haven't laid a single hand on me. It was true. Kakashi was breathing heavily, his chakra reserves already noticeably lower from maintaining the Sharingan. Naruto didn't even seem to be winded. Then I guess I'll have to get serious, Kakashi said, flashing through hand signs. Fire style. Fireball jutsu. He unleashed a massive sphere of flame, far larger than Sasuke's, that scorched the earth as it roared towards Naruto. Naruto didn't move. He simply raised one hand, palm open. Just as the fireball was about to engulf him, the air in front of his palm seemed to ripple. The massive conflagration hit the invisible distortion and imploded, vanishing without a sound, without even a puff of smoke. It was just gone. Kakashi's blood ran cold. He had never seen anything like it. It wasn't an absorption jutsu. It was erasure. My turn, Naruto said, his voice dropping to a low hum. He disappeared from the branch. Kakashi's Sharingan spun wildly, trying to track him. He was everywhere and nowhere at once. Then, Kakashi felt a presence behind him and a single finger tap him on the shoulder. He froze. Naruto stood there, his hand outstretched, his palm hovering an inch from Kakashi's chest where the bells hung. He could have taken them at any point in the last 10 seconds. He could have driven his hand through Kakashi's sternum. I believe this is my win, Naruto stated, his voice calm. His blue eyes weren't filled with pride or arrogance, but with a profound, ancient certainty. The timer on the post let out a shrill ring, signaling noon. Kakashi slowly lowered his headband over his Sharingan, his mind reeling. He looked at the untouched bells on his hip, then at the godlike child standing before him. He forced a breath. You pass, he said, his voice raspy. A few minutes later, Sasuke was freed from the ground and Sakura was roused from her faint. They stood before the posts, confused and dejected. Naruto was standing off to his side, his hands back in his pockets. What's going on? Did Naruto get the bells? Sakura asked. No, Kakashi said, leaning against a post. None of you got the bells, but you pass. What? But you said, I said one of you would go back if you couldn't get a bell, Kakashi interrupted. But that was a lie. He looked at them, his gaze serious. The true purpose of this test was to see if you could function as a team. To see if you could put the mission before yourselves and work together to overcome an impossible obstacle. He sighed. You all failed miserably. You, Sakura, abandoned Sasuke the moment you thought he was in danger and fainted. You, Sasuke, saw your teammates as hindrances and tried to do everything yourself. And you, Naruto. He paused, looking at the blonde. You assessed the situation, determined your teammates were not up to the task, and decided to handle it yourself. A logical, if arrogant, decision. You had the power to take the bells at any time, but you chose to demonstrate your superiority instead of achieving the objective as a unit. Naruto met his gaze. And if I had retrieved the bells myself, what would that have proven? That I am strong. We already knew that. That I could defeat you. We already knew that too. My goal was not to take the bells. It was to understand the test. The test was flawed. Kakashi blinked. Flawed? How? Because it encouraged selfishness, Naruto explained, his voice even. 2 bells, 3 people. It's a paradox designed to force competition. But shinobi missions are not competitions. They're matters of life and death. A true test of teamwork would have been an objective that required all 3 of us to succeed. Here, you offered a scenario where individual success was possible at the cost of the team. I chose not to play. He then turned to Sakura and Sasuke. Sasuke, your fire is strong but unfocused. Sakura, your chakra control is precise, perfect for medical ninjutsu, but you lack conviction. We all have flaws, but together, he looked back at Kakashi. Together, we can compensate for them. That is the lesson you should have been teaching. The clearing was silent save for the wind. Kakashi stared at Naruto, completely and utterly speechless. He had been so thoroughly deconstructed, his methods, his test, his very philosophy as a teacher, laid bare and dissected by a 12-year-old. Finally, a slow smile spread under his mask. A real one, Team 7 is officially formed, he said, his voice filled with a newfound excitement. Our first mission starts tomorrow. Be at the gate at dawn. And Naruto, try not to be so terrifyingly correct all the time. It's unnerving. Their first C-rank mission was a simple escort. Protect a bridge builder named Tazuna until he returned to the land of waves. The man was loud, smelled of sake, and eyed them with derision. You're sending a bunch of snot-nosed kids to protect me? He slurred. especially that short one with the stupid look on his face. He was pointing at Naruto. Sasuke tensed. Sakura bristled. Naruto simply blinked, his expression unchanging. "Sir," he said, his voice flat. "The stupid look is me calculating the optimal travel route to Wave, accounting for standard ambush points and potential water-based threats. And I am not short. You are simply loud." Tazuna sputtered, speechless. Kakashi coughed to hide a laugh. The journey was uneventful for the first few hours. Naruto walked point, his senses expanded. He was a living detection system. Sakura and Sasuke flanked Tazuna, while Kakashi brought up the rear, reading his book but with his senses on high alert. Naruto suddenly stopped. He knelt, touching a puddle on the otherwise dry road. The sun had been beating down for hours. There was no reason for a puddle to be here. "Kakashi-sensei," Naruto said, his voice low. "I see it," Kakashi replied, his hand already on a kunai. Two figures erupted from the water, chains with wicked blades flying towards them. Their target was Tazuna. Before Sakura or Sasuke could even fully register the threat, Naruto moved. He wasn't a blur of motion. He was simply gone from his spot and then present amongst the attackers. There was a series of sickening, wet crunches, like snapping celery stalks. It was over in less than a second. The two attackers, the notorious demon brothers of the mist, were on the ground, twitching and groaning, their limbs bent at impossible angles. Every major joint in their bodies had been dislocated with terrifying precision. Naruto stood over them, his expression unreadable. He hadn't drawn a weapon. He hadn't used a jutsu. He had neutralized two chunin-level threats with his bare hands in the blink of an eye. Tazuna stared, his mouth agape, the bravado draining from his face to be replaced by stark terror. Sakura felt a wave of nausea. Sasuke's eyes were wide, a new level of understanding dawning in them. This wasn't just skill. This was something else entirely. "Tazuna-san," Kakashi said, his voice dangerously calm as he tied the brothers to a tree. "This mission is clearly above AC rank. These are chunin from Kirigakure. You have some explaining to do." After a great deal of prodding, Tazuna confessed. His country was being strangled by a shipping magnate named Gato, a cruel tyrant who controlled the economy and kept the people in poverty. The bridge was their only hope for freedom, which was why Gato wanted him dead. He couldn't afford a higher-ranked mission. "We should turn back," Sakura said, her voice trembling slightly. "This is too dangerous for us." Kakashi looked at Naruto. Naruto was staring at Tazuna, his gaze intense. "It's not just about the money, is it?" Naruto asked the bridge builder. "There's something else happening on that island. Something you're not telling us." Tazuna flinched. I don't know what you're talking about." Naruto's eyes narrowed. "Yes, you do. I can feel it. A sickness in the land. A wrongness. We will continue the mission. But you will tell us everything." His tone left no room for argument. They continued, the atmosphere thick with tension. As they traveled by boat through the thick mist towards Wave, Naruto's discomfort grew. It was a low thrum at the base of his skull, a dissonant chord in the symphony of nature he constantly felt. Suddenly, a massive sword, as tall as a man, spun out of the fog and embedded itself in a tree trunk just ahead of them. A figure stood atop it, his face covered in bandages, the familiar symbol of Kirigakure on his headband. "Zabuza Momochi, the demon of the hidden mist," Kakashi said, his hand already moving to his headband. "Everyone, protect Tazuna. This is on a whole different level." The air grew heavy and cold as Zabuza's killing intent washed over them. Sakura and Sasuke froze, their bodies refusing to obey. It was a crushing, physical pressure. Then, an even greater pressure slammed down, originating from Naruto. It was ancient, vast, and utterly indifferent. It was the feeling of standing at the bottom of the ocean, the weight of the world pressing down on you. Zabuza's killing intent vanished, snuffed out like a candle in a hurricane. He visibly staggered on his sword hilt, his eyes wide with shock and fear. What is this?" Zabuza gasped, his voice strained. "What is this chakra?" "It's not chakra," Naruto said, stepping forward. "It's presence." Kakashi engaged Zabuza, Sharingan blazing. It was a spectacular fight of water clones, substitutions, and high-speed ninjutsu. Naruto watched, his team formed in a defensive perimeter around Tazuna. He analyzed Zabuza's style, his water-based jutsu, his reliance on silent killing. Eventually, Kakashi was caught. Trapped in Zabuza's water prison jutsu, he gasped for air. "Run!" he choked out. "Take Tazuna and run. This is my fight." Zabuza laughed, a cruel, gurgling sound. "It's over, Kakashi. Now, I just have to deal with your brats." A water clone formed, moving towards them. Sasuke fired a fireball, which hissed into steam against the clone's watery body. Sakura threw a kunai, which passed through it harmlessly. "It's no use," Sasuke gritted out. "Enough," Naruto said. He walked forward, his footsteps silent on the damp ground. He walked past his teammates, past the water clone, directly towards the real Zabuza, who was maintaining the prison.
"Get back, you little Gaki," Zabuza snarled. "You want to die that badly?"
Naruto didn't reply. He continued his steady advance. Zabuza, enraged by the boy's insolence, swung his massive executioner's blade with one free hand, intending to cleave him in two. The blade, a legendary weapon that had tasted the blood of hundreds, descended. Naruto raised one hand.
He caught it. The sound was a dull, sickening clang. Not of metal on metal, but of metal on something infinitely harder. Zabuza's eyes bulged from behind his bandages. The massive sword, held in the small, open palm of a 12-year-old boy, had stopped dead. Spiderweb cracks began to form on the blade's surface, originating from Naruto's hand.
My blade," Zabuza whispered in disbelief. Naruto tightened his grip. With a sound like screaming metal, the legendary executioner's blade shattered into 1,000 pieces. Zabuza was frozen in shock. Naruto stepped forward, entering his guard. He looked up at the feared demon of the mist, and Zabuza felt that soul-crushing pressure return, 100 times stronger. He felt like prey. He saw, not a boy with blue eyes, but two vast, deep oceans threatening to drown him. He couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic bird trying to escape a cage of ice. It was in that moment of absolute terror that two senbon needles sprouted from Zabuza's neck. He collapsed, seemingly dead. A small figure in a hunter nin mask appeared on a branch above. "Thank you for cornering him," the hunter nin said in a soft, melodic voice. "I have been tracking Zabuza for some time. My duty is to dispose of the body." In a flicker, the hunter nin and Zabuza's body were gone. Kakashi was freed from the prison, collapsing to his knees. The mist began to clear. "He's alive," Naruto said, looking at the spot where they had vanished. That was his partner. The needles were aimed to induce a temporary death state, not to kill. Kakashi looked at Naruto, then at the shattered remains of Zabuza's sword, and finally at his students, who were staring at Naruto with a mixture of awe and terror. "Let's get to Tazuna's house. We need to rest, and we need to prepare. They'll be back."
At Tazuna's house, Kakashi collapsed from chakra exhaustion. While Sakura stood guard, Naruto and Sasuke began their own preparations. Naruto, however, seemed distracted. The wrongness he felt was stronger here, a constant, nauseating hum. That night, after a tense dinner where Tazuna's grandson, Inari, glared at them with resentful eyes, Naruto slipped out of the house. He followed the feeling, the corruption, walking through the dark woods until he reached the coast. He stood on a high cliff, looking down at the churning, black water. The wrongness was coming from a deep trench, miles offshore. It was a slumbering, malevolent consciousness, and it was being prodded. Poked, annoyed into waking.
A twig snapped behind him. Zabuza and a maskless Haku stood there. "We are not your enemies," Zabuza said, his voice rough. He looked battered, but very much alive. Haku stood beside him, his expression serene but his posture tense. "Gato is a means to an end," Zabuza explained, deciding that honesty was the only viable strategy against the monster before him. "He funds my operations. But his new backers, they're the reason this island feels so wrong. They're a cult. Worshippers of the Old Ones. They believe this land is a holy site, a prison for some ancient god, and they want to set it free. They think Gato's tyranny will provide enough misery and death to fuel their ritual," Haku added softly. "They're using him, just as he is using us." Naruto stared at the dark sea. "A prison," he murmured. He could feel it. The sleeping thing was vast, mindless. a creature of pure, destructive instinct. It was nothing like the ancient, intelligent consciousness that resided within him, but it was born of a similar, primordial era. They will fail. They are starting the final ritual tomorrow night, on the bridge, Zabuza said. Gato and his men will be there. It will be a bloodbath. Then we will be there too, Naruto said, turning to face them. His eyes seemed to glow in the dark. You have a choice. You can fight for a man who will discard you, or you can fight for the side that will not be annihilated when that thing wakes up. The next day was a blur of frantic activity. While Sasuke and Sakura practiced tree climbing to improve their chakra control under Kakashi's tutelage, Naruto sat in quiet meditation, focusing his senses, trying to understand the full scope of the threat. As dusk fell, a thick, unnatural fog rolled in. The temperature plummeted. A low, guttural chant began to echo from the unfinished bridge, carried on the wind. Team 7, along with Zabuza and Haku, raced to the bridge. It was a scene from a nightmare. Gato stood with 100 hired thugs, laughing as a group of robed cultists performed a ritual around a swirling vortex of energy in the center of the bridge. Tazuna and his workers were cowering, held captive. Kill them all! Gato shrieked as he saw them arrive. The battle was chaos. Kakashi engaged the thugs. Sasuke and Sakura fought to free the builders. Zabuza and Haku moved like ghosts, dispatching cultists with brutal efficiency. But it was too late. The vortex of energy exploded outwards, and from the sea below the bridge, something began to rise. It was a colossal, amorphous shape of tentacles, eyes, and gnashing maws, a creature of pure Lovecraftian horror. It let out a shriek that shattered glass miles away and warped the very air. Pav switch. Haku. The creature was a nightmare made real. Its presence was an assault on the senses. A wave of pure psychic filth that made Haku want to claw his own eyes out. He saw Zabuza-sama falter, his legendary resolve cracking in the face of such an abomination. The thugs were screaming, some of them going mad, attacking each other. Then, Haku felt it. A shift in the world. The creature's suffocating pressure was suddenly met by another, infinitely greater force. It was like a tidal wave crashing against a mountain. The air grew still and heavy, charged with an energy that felt like static electricity and tasted of ozone. The chaotic noise of battle died down, replaced by a low, resonant hum that vibrated in Haku's very bones. He turned and saw Naruto Uzumaki walking towards the edge of the bridge, towards the rising monstrosity. Naruto was the source of the hum. He was the eye of this new, terrifying storm. An ethereal, iridescent blue light began to emanate from Naruto's body. It wasn't the warm glow of normal chakra. It was a cold, alien light, the color of a dying star. It didn't illuminate the fog. It consumed it. The air around him shimmered, distorting like a heat haze on a winter's day. Haku felt an instinctual, primal terror that had nothing to do with killing intent. This was the fear a field mouse felt when the shadow of an eagle fell over it. It was the fear of a lesser god in the presence of a greater one. Naruto stepped off the bridge. He didn't fall. He descended, walking down the air as if on invisible stairs, until he stood on the surface of the churning water, which grew calm around his feet. He looked up at the colossal creature, a tiny figure of impossible power against a backdrop of cosmic horror. The blue light around him intensified, and the hum rose in pitch to a high, piercing whine that made Haku's ears bleed. This boy, he wasn't a ninja, he wasn't a Jinchuriki, he was a king. Pav end. Naruto stood on the water, his entire being alight with atomy chakra. He raised his head, and his eyes were no longer blue, but brilliant, burning fissures of azure energy. He opened his mouth, and the high-pitched whine reached a crescendo. From his throat, a focused, incandescent beam of pure blue power erupted. It wasn't a fireball. It wasn't lightning. It was a torrent of deconstruction, a river of raw, nuclear force that sliced through the night. There was no grand explosion. There was no sound of impact. The beam touched the creature, and the creature simply ceased to be. The part of it struck by the beam was not burned or blasted away. It was unwritten from existence. The beam carved through the monster's core and continued, striking the ocean beyond. It carved a perfect, steaming canyon in the sea, half a mile long. The water vaporized into nothingness. For a single, breathtaking moment, the seabed was visible before the ocean crashed back in on itself with a deafening roar that shook the entire island. The creature dissolved, its remaining form collapsing into dust on the wind. The ritual was broken. The sky began to clear. Naruto stood on the water, the blue light fading from him, leaving him once more as a boy in black and gray. He turned and walked back towards the bridge, the water parting before him. Gato and his remaining thugs were frozen, their faces masks of pure, mind-shattered terror. Gato dropped to his knees, babbling incoherently. Naruto stepped back onto the bridge. He glanced at Gato, a look of utter disinterest on his face, before his gaze settled on Zabuza and Haku. Zabuza fell to one knee. Then, slowly, he bowed his head, pressing his forehead to the cold, damp steel of the bridge. Beside him, Haku did the same. It was not the bow of a defeated foe. It was the prostration of a worshipper before their god. My life, Zabuza's voice was a ragged, awestruck whisper. My sword is broken. My path is lost. My life is yours to command, Lord Naruto. Naruto looked down at them, then up at the sky, where the last of the unnatural clouds were dissipating. For a fleeting second, as he released the last of the primordial energy, he felt a flicker. A pinprick of alien observation from the heavens, cold and geometric. It was there, and then it was gone. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him more than any monster, that he had just put himself on a board he never knew existed, in a game against players he could not yet see. He accepted Zabuza's pledge with a slow, solemn nod. The age of shinobi was about to end. The age of monsters had just begun. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2 The Alpha's Arena. The return of Team 7 to Konohagakure was not met with fanfare. There was no parade, no public commendation. Instead, a wall of silence and secrecy descended, thicker than the mist that had shrouded their mission. The official report, penned by Kakashi Hitaki and classified at the highest level by order of the Hokage himself, was a masterwork of understatement. It spoke of repelling an attack by a missing nin, Zabuza Momochi, and protecting the bridge builder. It made no mention of a death cult, a primordial monster rising from the sea, or a genin single-handedly vaporizing a small ocean. But secrets, in a village of spies, have a way of seeping through the cracks. The shattered remains of the executioner's blade, brought back as proof of Zabuza's defeat, were real. The hushed, terrified whispers of the two captured demon brothers, interrogated by Ibiki Morino's unit, spoke of a golden-haired demon who moved like a ghost and struck like a mountain. The most potent rumor, however, came from Zabuza and Haku themselves. They had walked through Konoha's gates not as prisoners, but as voluntary supplicants, requesting asylum and swearing fealty not to the Hokage, but directly to Naruto Uzumaki. They were now held in a secure compound, their future a subject of intense debate among the Jonin Council, but their story had planted a seed of terrifying truth in the village's collective consciousness. Naruto became an enigma. He was no longer just the prodigy, the quiet powerhouse of his class. He was something other. The villagers looked at him with a new kind of awe, one tinged with a primal fear. The shinobi saw him as a living strategic asset, a weapon of unimaginable power whose handler was not the Hokage, but the boy himself. In the Hokage's office, Hiruzen Sarutobi took a long drag from his pipe, the smoke curling around his weary face. Across from him, Kakashi stood at ease, his one visible eye betraying none of the turmoil he felt. To vaporize a creature of that scale, and a significant portion of the sea, Hiruzen murmured, rereading the classified addendum for the 10th time. The energy readings our barrier core picked up from that distance were astronomical. They dwarfed the release of the Kyuubi on the night of his birth. And it was controlled, Hokage-sama, Kakashi said, his voice grave. It was not a wild explosion. It was a precise, surgical strike. He aimed, fired, and eliminated the threat. Then he simply switched it off. The entity within him, Gojira, Hiruzen breathed the name. It felt ancient on his tongue. It is not a beast of hatred like the Biju. Jiraiya's theory was that it is a force of balance. It seems this force has a very direct way of restoring order. He sighed, the weight of 1,000 decisions pressing on his old shoulders. And now Zabuza Momochi, one of the 7 swordsmen, has sworn himself to Naruto's service. This complicates things. Suna has already sent inquiries. They are nervous. They should be, Kakashi stated plainly. The chunin exams are approaching. Every nation will be sending their best and brightest. They will all have one primary objective: to observe Naruto Uzumaki. Hiruzen nodded, his eyes closing. Keep him grounded, Kakashi. Teach him what it means to be a shinobi of Konoha. His power may be that of a god, but his heart must remain human. That is your true A-rank mission. Kakashi's eye curved slightly. With all due respect, Hokage-sama, I believe it is Naruto who is teaching us. 2 months later, Konoha was buzzing. The village swelled with foreign shinobi, their unfamiliar flak jackets and foreheads protectors a common sight in the bustling streets. The chunin exams were the centerpiece of this activity, a grand display of military might disguised as a meritocratic test. For the genin of Konoha, it was a chance to prove themselves. For the visiting nations, it was a chance to gauge the strength of their rivals. And for everyone, it was a chance to finally see the Leafs' rumored monster up close. Team 7 stood in the crowded, noisy hall of the Academy's first phase, the written exam. The air was thick with bravado, anxiety, and the subtle thrum of dozens of unique chakra signatures. Naruto was, as always, a point of absolute stillness in the chaos. He leaned against a wall, eyes closed, seemingly oblivious to the stares and whispers directed at him. So that's him, Akumo ninja muttered to his teammate, his dark skin beaded with sweat. He doesn't look like much. Don't be an idiot, his partner hissed back. Feel that pressure? It's faint, but it's there. Like the air is heavier around him. The Raikage himself warned us not to engage him, under any circumstances. Sakura felt a nervous pride swelling in her chest. Being on Naruto's team was like having a permanent escort of invisible, high-ranking bodyguards. No one bothered them. No one postured at them. They were given a wide, respectful berth. Sasuke stood beside her, his arms crossed, his gaze sweeping the room with analytical contempt. He had grown immensely in the past 2 months. Training with Naruto wasn't about learning jutsu. It was about learning efficiency, about understanding the battlefield as a whole. Naruto pushed him, forced him to be faster, stronger, smarter, and Sasuke had risen to the challenge. The gap between them was still a chasm, but Sasuke now saw it as a mountain to be climbed, not an abyss to despair in. A feminine voice laced with confidence and a hint of amusement cut through the noise. Well, you must be the famous Team 7. I have to say, the rumors don't quite do you justice. They turned to see a trio of sand siblings. A boy with purple face paint and a strange, puppet-like bundle on his back, a younger boy with dark ringed eyes and a gourd on his back who radiated pure malice, and a girl. She was tall, with 4 sandy blonde pigtails and startling teal eyes that held a sharp, intelligent light. She carried a massive fan on her back, and her posture was that of a commander, not a foot soldier. She was looking directly at Naruto. Temari, the boy with the gourd, Gaara, growled without looking at her. Do not associate with them. Temari ignored her brother, her gaze fixed on Naruto, who had finally opened his eyes. I'm Temari of the Sand. We've heard stories about a genin from the Leaf who shattered the executioner's blade with his bare hands. Naruto's gaze met hers. It was not challenging, not dismissive. It was simply seeing. Stories are often exaggerated, he said, his voice a low, calm baritone. Are they? Temari took a step closer, a smirk playing on her lips. She was one of the few people in the room who didn't seem intimidated by him. In fact, she seemed drawn to his aura, like a moth to a flame that could incinerate a city. I'm a fairly good judge of character. And of power. And you, Naruto Uzumaki, are absolutely drowning in it. The question is, do you control it, or does it control you? It was a direct challenge, a test of his composure. Sasuke tensed beside her, ready to step in. Naruto, however, simply offered a ghost of a smile. A storm does not need to be controlled, he replied, his voice smooth as polished stone. It simply needs to be aimed. Temari's eyes widened slightly, her smirk replaced by a look of genuine fascination. This was no mindless beast. This was a king, fully aware of his own power. Before she could reply, a loud, obnoxious voice interrupted them. Sasuke-kun. I knew you'd be here. Ino Yamanaka pushed through the crowd, her hand possessively on Sasuke's arm, though her eyes were locked on Naruto. Oh, Naruto, you're here too. Trying not to fall asleep? She teased, flipping her long blonde ponytail. Ino, Sakura growled. Just making sure my favorite rivals are ready to get crushed, Ino said, her flirty gaze raking over Naruto. She had also grown. Her senses as a Yamanaka were more acute than most, and she could feel the sheer magnetism of Naruto's presence. Being near him was intoxicating. You know, Naruto, all that quiet confidence is mysterious, but a girl likes a guy who can actually hold a conversation. Naruto turned his head slowly, his blue eyes pinning her, and a king likes a court that knows when to speak.
Ino's breath hitched. The playful jab had been returned with the weight of a decree. He wasn't insulting her, he was defining their dynamic, placing him at the center. She felt a hot flush creep up her neck, a mixture of embarrassment and exhilarating thrill. She had tried to get a reaction and had gotten one she was not prepared for. She quickly recovered, giving a haughty sniff and turning back to Sasuke, but the encounter had left her shaken and more intrigued than ever.
As Ino dragged her team away, Naruto's gaze softened as it found a small figure hiding behind Kiba and Shino. Hinata Hyuga was trembling, her pale lavender eyes wide with a mixture of terror and adoration. She had seen the entire exchange, had felt the subtle shifts of power in the room. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was a simple acknowledgement, but to Hinata, it was everything. It was a gesture that said, "I see you." A wave of warmth spread through her chest, steadying her frantic heart. She straightened her back, a flicker of her own resolve igniting in the face of his quiet strength. He gave her strength without even trying. The commotion was finally silenced by the arrival of the proctor, Ibiki Morino, a man whose scarred face was a testament to 1,000 painful secrets. The written exam began, a test of information gathering under extreme pressure. Naruto finished his paper in 10 minutes, not by cheating, but by simply knowing the answers. He didn't need to see the movements of a chunin's pen. The fundamental principles of shinobi arts were as intuitive to him as breathing. He spent the rest of the time observing the others, watching as they used their wits and unique skills to survive. He watched Hinata share her answers with a grateful Kiba, he watched Gaara use a third eye of sand to spy, and he watched Sasuke use his Sharingan to copy another's movements. He was proud of his team. When Ibiki announced the infamous 10th question, Naruto was unsurprised. It was a test of will, of the resolve to risk everything for the sake of one's dream. He watched as hands went up, as teams were disqualified. But his own team, and those of the other Konoha 11, remained steadfast. He met Sasuke's determined gaze and Sakura's nervous but firm expression with a nod of approval. Just as Ibiki was about to pass them, the window shattered inwards. A whirlwind of black cloth and paper unfurled into the form of the second proctor, Anko Mitarashi. She was wild, energetic, and radiated a dangerous, unhinged energy. "All right, you maggots," she yelled, pointing at the remaining teams. "The first exam is over, and I'm your next proctor. Follow me to the Forest of Death." The Forest of Death, Training Ground 44, was aptly named. It was a dark, menacing jungle, teeming with oversized predators and poisonous plants. Anko explained the rules with sadistic glee. Each team would be given either a heaven or an earth scroll. To pass, they had to fight their way through the forest, acquire the other type of scroll, and make it to the tower in the center within 5 days. "Just a little friendly advice," Anko said with a grin that didn't reach her eyes, "don't die." The gates opened, and Team 7 dashed into the oppressive gloom. "Okay, what's the plan?" Sakura asked, her senses on high alert. "We need an earth scroll." "The plan is to avoid fighting," Naruto said, his eyes scanning the canopy. "Pointless skirmishes are a waste of time and energy. We'll head directly to the tower. A vulnerable team will present itself sooner or later." "How do we avoid fighting in a place like this?" Sasuke asked, drawing a kunai. "You have eyes." "I have," Naruto paused, closing his own. "Everything else." He could feel it all. The life force of every creature in a 5-mile radius. The hum of the giant insects, the slow, cold-blooded pulse of the massive snakes, the frantic heartbeats of the other genin teams. To him, the forest was not a blind maze, it was a living map. "There's a team from AIM 3 clicks to the east, setting a trap. There's a large python sleeping in the river to the west. And there's a squad from Taki approaching from the north," Naruto reported calmly. "We will go southwest, the path is clear." He led them on a winding, seemingly random path. For hours, they moved without incident. They heard distant screams, the clash of steel, the roar of jutsu, but they encountered nothing. It was eerie. Naruto was navigating them through the pockets of calm in a hurricane of violence. On the second day, Naruto stopped them. "There's a team nearby," he said, his voice low. "They're wounded. They have what we need." They found them a few minutes later. A trio of grass nin, battered and bleeding from a previous encounter, huddled at the base of a giant tree. They clutched an earth scroll. Team 7 descended upon them, and the fight was over before it began. Sasuke's speed and Sakura's well-placed senbon, combined with Naruto's overwhelming presence, were more than enough. They took the scroll without inflicting any further serious injury. "Now we head to the tower," Naruto said, pocketing the scroll directly. Their path to the tower was less than a mile away when they encountered them. The Sand siblings stood in their path, blocking the way. Kankuro looked nervous. Temari looked intrigued. And Gaara was staring at Naruto, his teal eyes wide with a mixture of hatred and something else, something that looked like fear. A low growl emanated from the gourd on his back. "Give us your scroll," Gaara said, his voice a dry, rasping whisper. "We have no quarrel with you," Naruto replied calmly. "Step aside." "I need to prove my existence," Gaara hissed, sand beginning to swirl around his feet. "I will kill you. I will kill all of you. Your deaths will be my proof." The sand lashed out, but Naruto didn't move. The sand, imbued with the wild chakra of the Shukaku, stopped dead in the air a few feet from him, trembling as if it had hit an invisible wall. Gaara's eyes widened, his breath catching in his throat. "What?" Gaara thought, his mind reeling. "Why won't it obey me?" The entity within him, the one-tailed Shukaku, was screaming. It was a raw, primal shriek of pure terror that only Gaara could hear. For his entire life, the beast had been a voice of rage and bloodlust, a constant companion in his lonely existence. Now, for the first time, it was afraid. It was cowering. It was bowing before something else, something that stood calmly in the form of a blonde-haired boy. Naruto took a step forward. The air grew immensely heavy, pressing down on them. It felt like the sky was falling. This was not killing intent. This was an assertion of dominance, a fundamental law of nature being written into the fabric of reality. The king had arrived. "Your existence is not defined by the blood you spill," Naruto said, his voice resonating with a power that vibrated in their bones. He looked directly at Gaara, but he wasn't just speaking to the boy. He was speaking to the beast within. "It is defined by the bonds you protect. You are a prison for a broken, lonely creature. But you are not the creature itself. You are its warden. And you have failed in your duty." He took another step. Gaara stumbled back, clutching his head, a scream tearing from his throat. The sand whipped around him violently, forming a defensive sphere, but it was trembling, hesitant. "Naruto, what are you doing?" Sakura cried out, unnerved by the sheer pressure in the air. Naruto didn't answer. He reached out a hand, palm open. "Calm down," he commanded. The word was imbued with his will, a decree that could not be defied. The swirling sand collapsed, falling to the forest floor with a soft hiss. Gaara was on his knees, panting, staring at Naruto with wide, terrified, and utterly confused eyes. The screaming in his head had stopped. For the first time in his life, there was silence. What are you?" Gaara whispered. "A fellow jailer," Naruto said, his aura receding. "But my prisoner does not rattle his cage." He turned to Temari, who was looking at him with wide-eyed awe. "Take your brother and go. The tower is this way. We will not stop you." He then walked past them, his team following in stunned silence. Temari and Kankuro rushed to their brother's side, but their eyes followed Naruto until he disappeared into the trees. They had come seeking a scroll and had instead found a god. They were almost at the tower when it happened. A gust of wind, unnaturally strong and cold, ripped through the clearing. It felt wrong. Sickly. Naruto pushed Sakura and Sasuke behind him, his senses screaming. A massive snake, larger than any they had seen, shot out of the undergrowth, its jaws unhinging to swallow them whole. With a roar, it was intercepted and sliced in half by another massive snake, this one summoned by a figure who dropped from the trees. The figure was pale, with long black hair, golden eyes with slitted pupils, and a deeply unsettling smile. They wore the flak jacket and forehead protector of a grass nin, but Naruto knew instantly who this was. The sickness in the air, The corrupt chakra, it was a signature he would never forget. My. I was hoping I'd find you here, Orochimaru hissed, his long tongue flicking out to taste the air. The rumors that came out of the land of waves were just too delicious to ignore. I had to see the power of a primordial king for myself. Sasuke and Sakura were paralyzed, not by a jutsu, but by the sheer, undiluted malevolence radiating from the Sannin. Orochimaru, Naruto said, his voice flat. He pushed his own aura out, a protective shield that pushed back against the Sannin's vile presence, allowing his teammates to breathe. You are a long way from home, traitor. Home is where the most interesting experiments are, Orochimaru cackled. He blurred forward, his neck elongating unnaturally, his mouth open to bite Sasuke. He was stopped by Naruto's hand clamping around his throat. Naruto hadn't seemed to move. He was just suddenly there, holding the Sannin's stretched neck like a rope. Your target is me, Naruto said, his blue eyes turning cold. Orochimaru's eyes widened in surprise and delight. Such speed, such strength. He dissolved into mud, reforming a short distance away. Show me. Show me the power that shattered a swordsman's blade. Show me the might of a living god. He launched his full assault. A dozen giant snakes erupted from his sleeves, all lunging at Naruto. Naruto didn't dodge. He stood his ground, and as the snakes struck, they were repelled as if hitting a stone wall, their fangs shattering. Orochimaru's legendary Kusanagi sword shot out from his mouth, a blade that could cut through diamond, aimed straight at Naruto's heart. Naruto simply tilted his body, letting the blade skim past his jacket, and caught the blade's flat side between his thumb and forefinger. He squeezed. The enchanted, unbreakable sword groaned, bent, and then snapped in two. Orochimaru's ecstatic expression faltered for the first time, replaced by disbelief. Impossible. Your jutsu are just tricks, Naruto said, dropping the broken blade. They're a perversion of the natural order. You are an infection. A disease. He moved forward. Orochimaru, for all his power and experience, found himself completely on the defensive. Naruto's taijutsu was a force of nature. Each blow was like being struck by a meteor, the impacts shaking the very ground. The Sannin was forced to use every evasive maneuver, every substitution, every trick in his arsenal just to stay alive. His snakes were useless, his poisons had no effect on Naruto's alien physiology, and his vaunted ninjutsu was simply overwhelmed. Magnificent, Orochimaru shrieked, even as he was blasted back by a simple palm strike that broke his ribs. He healed instantly, his body contorting. This power, it's the ultimate life form, true immortality. He saw his opening. Naruto had stepped into his range. Orochimaru's neck shot out again, his fangs aiming for Naruto's shoulder, desperate to get a sample of his DNA, his cells, his power. This time, Naruto let him. The fangs sank into his shoulder. Orochimaru's eyes lit up with triumph. But the triumph turned to confusion, then to horror. He was not absorbing energy. He was not tasting blood. He was being invaded. Naruto's hand clamped down on the back of Orochimaru's head, holding him in place. You wanted a sample? Naruto's voice was a low, dangerous hum. His eyes began to glow with that terrifying blue light. Have one. A minuscule, controlled burst of his atomic chakra flowed through Orochimaru's fangs and directly into his body. POV switch. Orochimaru. Pain. It was an old, almost forgotten sensation for Orochimaru. But this was different. This was not the pain of a wound. This was the pain of deconstruction. The instant the boy's chakra entered his system, his cells began to scream. His immortal body, a masterpiece of forbidden jutsu and countless experiments, was coming undone. The energy was not like normal chakra, which he could analyze and absorb. This was a fundamental force, a solvent for LFE itself. It didn't burn, it unmade. He could feel his own cellular structure decaying, his carefully crafted vessel turning to slush from the inside out. His healing factor, which could regenerate limbs in seconds, was fighting a losing war against this atomic plague. Black veins spread from his mouth, down his neck, his body convulsing. Panic, a truly alien emotion, seized him. This was it. This was true death. The end of his grand ambition. With a final, desperate surge of will, he forced his body to shed its skin, abandoning the corrupted, dying vessel like a snake leaving its molt. He erupted from its mouth in his true form, a grotesque white serpent composed of countless smaller snakes, and fled, not even daring to look back. He had failed to capture the boy. He had lost his Kusanagi sword. He had been utterly, humiliatingly defeated. And he had never been more ecstatic in his entire, long life. The pain, the decay, the terror, it was all proof. The sample of chakra he had managed to contain before shedding his skin was the most valuable substance in the world. He hadn't just found a new power. He had found God. And now, he had a piece of him to study. Pav end. Naruto stood over the dissolving, mud-like remains of Orochimaru's abandoned body. The bite mark on his shoulder had already vanished, the potent regenerative power of his system purging the Sannin's venom as if it were water. He turned to his teammates, who were staring at him, their faces pale with shock. "Are you two all right?" he asked, his voice returning to its normal calm. Sakura could only nod, her throat too tight to speak. Sasuke stared at the spot where Orochimaru had fled, then back at Naruto, his fists clenched. The gap between them was not a mountain, it was a galaxy. A squad of Anbu, led by the proctor Anko, dropped into the clearing. She took in the scene: the dead snakes, the broken ground, the dissolving husk of a body, and her eyes widened. "What happened here?" Anko demanded, her hand on her sword. Before Sasuke or Sakura could speak, Naruto stepped forward. "Orochimaru," he said simply. "He fled east. He is wounded, but he will not die from this. He was testing my capabilities." Another figure landed silently beside Anko. She wore a standard Anbu porcelain cat mask, but her long, violet hair was unmistakable. It was Yugao Izuki. She looked at the scene, then her gaze locked onto Naruto. Even through the mask, he could feel her shock. "You fought Orochimaru, and won?" Yugao's voice was a strained whisper. "It was not a fight. It was an assessment," Naruto corrected, his gaze unwavering. "And he got what he came for. A sample of my power. He will use it. He will try to replicate it. The next time we see him, he will have something new and dangerous. Be prepared." He was not a genin reporting to his superiors. He was a commander issuing a warning. The Anbu, elite shinobi of the village, were silent, unconsciously deferring to his authority. Yugao stared at him, at the faint Uzumaki features in his face, and saw not the goofy, hyperactive boy the Hokage had sometimes reminisced about, but a living weapon of terrifying intellect and power. She felt a shiver of clan pride mixed with profound dread. Naruto turned away from them and looked toward the tower, his expression hardening. The games were over. The true monsters were beginning to crawl out of the shadows, and he was the only one standing in their way. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3 A King's Gambit. The 5 days allotted for the second phase of the chunin exams came to a close. Team 7 had been the first to arrive at the central tower, finishing the trial in just under 36 hours. They had spent the remaining 3.5 days in a state of meditative calm, at least on Naruto's part. For Sasuke and Sakura, it was a period of tense reflection, the encounter with Orochimaru having stripped away the last vestiges of their genin naivety. When the dust settled and the other bruised and battered teams staggered into the tower, the legend of Team 7 had cemented itself. They were not just skilled, they were untouched. Their clothes were clean, their supplies full, their scrolls pristine. They looked less like survivors of a deadly trial and more like observers who had taken a leisurely stroll through hell. The preliminary matches held in the tower's arena were a formality for them. When Naruto's name was called, his opponent, a burly Iwa Nin, took one look at the calm, silent blonde, remembered the chilling rumors about the boy who broke the unbreakable sword, and promptly forfeited, bowing stiffly before walking off the arena floor. The action, or lack thereof, spoke louder than any battle could have. The revelation that Orochimaru, one of the legendary Sannin and an S-rank traitor, had personally infiltrated the exams sent a shockwave through Konoha's leadership. The security for the final round was tripled. Anbu were everywhere, ghosts in the rafters and shadows in the alleyways. But it did little to soothe the tension. A predator was circling their village, and the bait was a 12-year-old boy who held the power of a god in his fists. The month-long break before the finals was a crucible. It was a time for training, for strategy, and for the forging of bonds under the heat of impending conflict. For Team 7, it was a period of explosive growth, orchestrated by Naruto himself. He took his team to one of the more secluded training grounds, a place of waterfalls and ancient, thick-trunked trees. Kakashi was there, but he acted more as a chaperone and consultant. The teaching was all Naruto. Sasuke, Naruto began, his voice echoing slightly in the clearing. Your speed is impressive. Your Sharingan gives you an edge in reaction time. But you're inefficient. You rely on overwhelming the opponent. Your Chidori is a blade, but you wield it like a club. Sasuke scowled, the criticism stinging his pride. What do you suggest? Precision, Naruto said. He tossed a single leaf into the air. Your Chidori is a concentration of lightning chakra in your hand. An assassination technique. It's meant for a single, decisive blow. But its sound gives it away. Its true strength is the speed at which you deliver it. He pointed at the falling leaf. Forget jutsu. Forget power. For the next week, you will do one thing. You will move from that tree, he indicated 100 yards away, to this leaf and catch it before it touches the ground. You will do it without a flicker technique. You will do it with pure, physical speed. When you can do that so fast that the sound of your movement arrives after you've already caught it, then we will work on your Chidori. For Sakura, his approach was different. He found her practicing her already excellent chakra control, trying to emulate the flashy techniques she'd seen. That's not your path, Sakura, he said gently, appearing beside her so silently she jumped. But I need to get stronger, she protested. I can't just keep getting protected by you and Sasuke-kun. Strength is not just about destruction, Naruto countered. He held up his hand, a small, intricate orb of his blue, atomic chakra spinning silently in his palm. It didn't radiate heat, only a profound, heavy pressure. This can level a mountain, but it cannot mend a broken bone. It cannot counteract a poison. It cannot bring a teammate back from the brink of death. He let the orb dissipate. Your chakra control is the most precise I have ever seen in a person our age. It's a surgeon's gift. In your hands, chakra is not a weapon, it's a scalpel. You have the potential to become the greatest medical nin of this generation. A medic on the battlefield is not a support unit. They're the ultimate defense. They're the guardians of the team's life force. That is a position of immense strength and responsibility. It is a burden I cannot carry, and one that Sasuke is ill-suited for. It must be you. His words struck a chord deep within her. He wasn't placating her. He was seeing her potential, a potential she had never considered for herself, and framing it not as a lesser role, but as a vital, powerful one. For the first time, she felt a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with her infatuation with Sasuke. It was her own. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back, her expression hardening with new resolve. Show me, she said, her voice firm. The final piece of the puzzle arrived 3 days into their training. Jiraiya, the Toad Sage, one of the 3 legendary Sannin, appeared in a theatrical puff of smoke and a boisterous laugh. He was a giant of a man with a wild mane of white hair and a mischievous glint in his eyes. So, this is the little godeling who has Orochimaru wetting his pants, he boomed, sizing Naruto up. Naruto simply looked at him, his gaze level. Jiraiya-sama. The Hokage said you were coming. Jiraiya's boisterous demeanor softened slightly under the boy's unnervingly calm gaze. He had expected the Kyuubi's brat, loud and full of orange. He found a young man who carried himself with the gravitas of a cage. Their sessions were not about ninjutsu. Naruto had no need for the Rasengan. His control over his own unique energy was far more advanced. Instead, they met at night, sitting by a fire under the stars, and they talked strategy. Jiraiya, with his vast spy network, laid out the world for Naruto. He spoke of the Akatsuki, a shadowy organization of S-rank missing nin who were hunting the Biju. Orochimaru was one of them, Jiraiya explained, his expression grim. He left, but they're still out there, and from what I've gathered, they're not just collecting beasts. They're collecting power. And you, kid, are the biggest source of power on the planet. They will come for you. I know, Naruto replied, staring into the flames. I felt their gaze. Itachi Uchiha. Jiraiya choked on his sake. You've met Itachi? He and his partner, Kisame Hoshigaki, came to Konoha after the second exam, Naruto said, his voice flat. They were testing the waters. I sent them away with a message. What message? Jiraiya asked, his mind racing. That I am not a cage to be unlocked, Naruto said, his eyes glowing faintly in the firelight. I am the monster itself. Jiraiya stared at him, a profound sense of awe mixing with his fear. Minato's legacy was not just a hero's son. He was something new, something that would irrevocably change the world. Their conversations shifted to politics, to the delicate balance of power between the villages, to the way Naruto's very existence had tilted the scales. Jiraiya was no longer a teacher, he was an advisor, briefing his king on the state of the realm. Amidst the intense training and strategic meetings, the threads of personal relationships began to weave a more complex tapestry. One night, unable to quiet his mind, Naruto found himself walking through the silent streets of Konoha. He was drawn to the Hyuga compound, a place of stern tradition and quiet discipline. On a training veranda, under the pale light of the full moon, Hinata was practicing her gentle fist kata. Her movements were fluid, graceful, yet filled with a hesitant uncertainty. He watched her for a long time from the shadows, admiring the quiet determination she possessed. Finally, he stepped into the light. She gasped, stumbling mid-kata, her face flushing crimson. "En Naruto-kun. Your form is perfect, Hinata," he said, his voice soft so as not to startle her further. "Your movements are precise. But your heart is not in it. You hesitate. Why?" She looked down, her fingers twisting together. "My father, he says I am not strong enough. That I am a disappointment to the main branch, that my gentle fist is too gentle." "He is wrong," Naruto stated simply. He stepped closer. "He sees with his eyes, but he does not see you. Your gentleness is not a weakness. It is the source of your control. You do not seek to destroy. You seek to disable. To protect. There is more strength in that than in all the destructive jutsu in the world." He looked at her eyes, those pale, beautiful lavender orbs. "The Byakugan sees everything. But you see more. You see the good in people. You saw it in me, when no one else did." Tears welled in Hinata's eyes, but these were not tears of sadness. They were tears of validation. He understood. He saw her, the real her, not the failed heiress. "Do not let them put you in a cage, Hinata," he said, his voice a low, encouraging murmur. "Your destiny is your own to write." He reached out, his fingers gently brushing a tear from her cheek. The touch was electric, sending a jolt of warmth through her entire being. She looked up at him, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, and found the courage she never knew she had. "Thank you, Naruto-kun," she whispered, her voice clear and steady for the first time. In the stark light of day, his interactions were different. He found Ino practicing at her family's flower shop, though she was more focused on preening than training. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," she said, leaning against a counter, a challenging smirk on her face. "Come to buy some flowers for your secret admirer?" "I came to see if the fiercest kunoichi in Konoha was keeping her skills sharp," Naruto replied smoothly, walking towards her. Ino preened. "Of course. I could take you on any day." "Is that a challenge, Yamanaka?" he asked, a playful glint in his eye. "Maybe it is, Uzumaki." What followed was not a spar so much as a dance. Ino came at him with a flurry of swift kicks and punches, her taijutsu far more polished than he expected. He didn't block or counter. He simply moved, flowing around her attacks, his movements economical and impossibly graceful. He was always just out of her reach, yet so close she could feel the air stir. "You're fast," he complimented, easily ducking under a roundhouse kick. "You're not even trying," she panted, frustrated. "I don't need to," he said, suddenly appearing behind her, his breath warm on her neck. "To try would imply you are a threat." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "And you, Ino, are many things. Beautiful. Clever. Ambitious. But you are not a threat to me." He was gone before she could spin around. She stood there, her heart hammering, her face burning. He had complimented her, insulted her, and left her completely breathless in the space of 10 seconds. She was infuriated, and she had never been more attracted to anyone in her life. His moments with Sakura were quieter. After a grueling session where he guided her through the basics of medical ninjutsu, watching her mend a deep gash on a fish he'd caught with flawless precision, they sat by the river, exhausted. "You're a natural," he said, breaking the comfortable silence. "I knew you would be." "Thank you, Naruto," she said, her voice soft. She looked at him, truly looked at him, not as the monster or the prodigy, but as her teammate. The boy who had seen her potential and given her a purpose. For everything. For believing in me. I will always believe in my team, he replied, his gaze fixed on the setting sun. I trust you with my life, Sakura. The words were simple, but they landed with the weight of an oath. In that moment, her childhood crush on Sasuke felt flimsy, superficial. The bond she was forging with Naruto was built on a foundation of mutual respect and shared danger. It was real. The most explosive interaction, however, came from the most unexpected quarter. Tamari of the Sand was in Konoha, acting as soon as official envoy for the finals, a mission given to her to both observe Naruto and to try and mend the diplomatic rift his encounter with Gaara had caused. She found him in a training ground, practicing alone. Uzumaki, she called out, her voice sharp. He turned, his expression calm. Tamari. To what do I owe the pleasure? My father, the Kazekage, sends his regards, she said stiffly. He is concerned about my brother. Gaara is a victim, Naruto said. Of the beast within him, and of the village that feared him. Fear is a poor foundation for strength. And what is your foundation? Raw power. She challenged, her hand resting on the giant fan on her back. Control, he countered. And conviction. Show me, she said, a feral grin spreading across her face. She unfurled her fan. A little diplomatic spar. For the sake of international relations. Naruto smirked. As you wish. What followed was a battle of titans. Tamari unleashed furious gales, her wind-scythe dance capable of leveling a forest. Naruto simply stood his ground, his aura flaring, creating a bubble of calm around him that the winds could not penetrate. She was a hurricane, and he was the mountain she broke against. Frustrated, she moved in close, using her fan as a bludgeon. The fight became a high-speed clash of taijutsu. She was fierce, powerful, and skilled. He was better. He disarmed her, sending her fan flying, and cornered her against a tree, his body pressing hers, his forearm resting gently against her throat. They were both breathing heavily, the energy of the fight still crackling between them. Checkmate, he murmured, his face inches from hers. The look in her eyes was not one of defeat, but of wild, blazing excitement. Is it? She breathed. And then she closed the distance, her lips crashing against his. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a clash, a battle for dominance, as fierce and passionate as the spar that had preceded it. His hands went to her waist, pulling her tight against him, and he responded with equal fire. It was a kiss that spoke of power acknowledging power, of two forces of nature finding a rare and exhilarating equal. A shout from the edge of the training ground, Tamari. We are late for the briefing. Caused them to break apart. Kankuro stood there, looking scandalized. Tamari straightened her clothes, a faint blush on her cheeks but her eyes still burning with intensity. She gave Naruto a look that was both a promise and a threat, before turning and stalking off with her brother. The tension was left hanging in the air, a live wire waiting for the next spark. The day of the finals arrived, bright and clear. The stadium was packed, a roaring sea of civilians and shinobi from every nation. In the cage box, Hiruzen sat beside the Kazekage, Orochimaru in disguise, a fact Naruto was keenly aware of, his senses picking up the faint, sickly scent of the sanin beneath the perfumed robes. The first matches were spectacular. Sasuke, showcasing his new, blinding speed, defeated his opponent in seconds. Shino's Battle of Insects was a masterclass in strategy. But the crowd was waiting for one fight. And now, the proctor, Genma, announced the final match of the first round, Neji Hyuga versus Naruto Uzumaki. The roar of the crowd was deafening. Neji, the stoic genius of the Hyuga clan, walked onto the field with an air of absolute confidence. Naruto followed, his expression as placid as a calm sea. It is your fate to lose to me here, Neji stated, his Byakugan already activated, the veins bulging around his temples. A failure cannot change his destiny. Naruto looked at him, then up at the Hyuga elders sitting in the stands. You speak of fate and destiny, Neji. You say we are all trapped in cages of our own making. But you are wrong. Look at me. Was it my destiny to have this power? He asked, his voice calm but carrying throughout the silent stadium. Was it fate that sealed a primordial king within me? No, it was a choice. A desperate choice made by my parents to save my life. A choice that spat in the face of destiny. He looked back at Neji, his blue eyes piercing. Your cage is not your destiny, Neji. The cursed seal on your forehead is a symbol of oppression, not fate. Your cage is the bitterness you cling to. It's a door you refuse to open. Neji sneered. Your pretty words are meaningless. I will show you the inescapable truth of my power. He fell into the gentle fist stance. 8 trigrams 64 palms. He shot forward, a blur of motion, his hands striking with blinding speed. 2 palms. 4 palms. 8. 16. 32. 64. A flurry of strikes, each one capable of shutting down a chakra network, of destroying internal organs.
But none of them landed. Naruto stood perfectly still, and Neji's hands passed through him as if he were a ghost. It was an afterimage. The real Naruto was standing behind Neji, his hands in his pockets.
Neji spun around, shocked. How? You are too slow, Naruto said simply.
Enraged, Neji unleashed his ultimate defense. 8 trigrams palms revolving heaven. He spun, a whirlwind of chakra creating an impenetrable dome. Naruto watched the technique with academic curiosity. Then, he simply walked forward. He didn't punch it. He didn't use a jutsu. He just pushed. He placed his palm flat against the spinning dome of chakra.
The effect was instantaneous. The revolving heaven, a technique that could repel any physical attack, shattered like glass. The chakra exploded outwards, sending Neji tumbling across the arena floor, his body smoking. Naruto stood over him. It is over. Neji struggled to his feet, panting, his pride in tatters. It's not over. Yes, it is, Naruto said, and he moved. It was not a flicker, but a single, fluid step that covered the distance between them instantly. He tapped Neji on the forehead, right over the cursed seal, with one finger. Neji's eyes rolled back into his head, and he collapsed, unconscious. It was an absolute, effortless, and undeniable victory. Naruto had not just beaten Neji, he had deconstructed his entire worldview and then switched him off like a light. As the medics carried Neji away, Naruto looked up at the cage box, his eyes locking with the case cages. He gave a subtle, knowing nod. The game begins now. As Sasuke and Gaara stepped onto the field for their match, a strange, sleepy feeling began to drift over the crowd. White feathers fell from the sky. Genjutsu. The invasion had begun. Naruto flared his chakra, a sharp pulse that shattered the illusion for everyone in his immediate vicinity. Around the stadium, explosions rocked the walls as sound and sand shinobi revealed themselves. In the cage box, the cage seized Hiruzen, putting a kunai to his throat, as 4 sound nin erected the shimmering 4 violet flames barrier. Chaos erupted. But where there was chaos, Naruto was a pillar of order. Sakura. Find Hinata and Ino. Form a medical unit and begin triage of the wounded, he commanded, his voice cutting through the panic. Sasuke. Sasuke, who had been about to engage the transforming Gaara, looked back at him. Gaara is yours, Naruto said, his voice ringing with authority. He is a shinobi of a rival village, but he is a fellow Jinchuriki. Do not kill him. Subdue him. Show him the strength and the will of a Konoha shinobi. I have bigger problems. Sasuke stared for a second, a storm of emotions in his eyes. This was not an order from a teammate. It was an expression of trust. Naruto was entrusting him with a vital part of the battle. Sasuke nodded, a fierce grin spreading across his face, and shot off after the fleeing, monstrous Gaara. Naruto turned his attention to the cage box, to the real threat. But his path was blocked. A grotesque creature was crawling over the stadium wall, summoned by Orochimaru's lieutenants. It was a horrifying amalgam of dozens of bodies, twisted and fused together, skin stretched over mismatched limbs, multiple faces moaning in silent agony. It was a perversion of life, fueled by the curse marks Orochimaru had perfected, and at its core, Naruto could feel it, a faint, cancerous echo of his own chakra, from the sample Orochimaru had stolen. So this is what you've made with my power, Naruto murmured, his voice cold with fury. An abomination. The Jonin, led by Guy and Asuma, threw everything they had at it. Fireballs, wind blades, even Whi's powerful strikes, but the creature simply regenerated, its flesh writhing and reknitting. It let out a piercing psychic scream that sent waves of nausea through the defenders. Pav switch. Hiruzen Sarutobi. Hiruzen grunted as the point of the Kusanagi blade pressed against his throat. Orochimaru's face, peeled back from his cage disguise, was a mask of gleeful insanity. "It's over, old man," his former student hissed. "This village will burn, and I will rise from its ashes with my new vessel." Hiruzen's gaze was fixed on the arena below. He saw the Jonin struggling against the monstrous creature. He saw his village in flames. A profound sense of failure washed over him. Had it all been for nothing? The will of fire, the legacy he had inherited from his own masters, was about to be extinguished. Then, he saw Naruto. The boy stood alone, facing the abomination that was holding off his most elite shinobi. He was perfectly calm, his hands unclenched at his sides. The air around him began to change. Hiruzen, a master of all 5 elements, a man called the Professor, felt a power that defied all classification. It wasn't an element. It was a principle. The principle of mass and energy itself. A blue light, soft at first, began to emanate from Naruto. It grew in intensity, until he was a beacon of azure light in a sea of fire and smoke. A low hum started, a sound that Hiruzen felt in his teeth, in the very marrow of his bones. It was the sound of a star being born. "What is he doing?" Orochimaru whispered, his sadistic glee replaced by a flicker of the same terror Hiruzen had seen in his eyes in the forest of death. The blue light around Naruto condensed. His dorsal fins, a feature Hiruzen had only read about in Jiraiya's most secret reports, materialized as glowing, ethereal plates of light down his back. The hum rose to a screaming crescendo. Then, Naruto unleashed his power. It wasn't a beam. It wasn't a fireball. It was a pulse. A silent, expanding sphere of pure, blue, deconstructive energy. Pavend. The atomic pulse washed over the arena. It did not explode. It did not burn. It simply erased. The grotesque creature, the product of 100 stolen lives and a Sanin's dark genius, vanished. It was not blown apart. It was atomized, its very matter unmade in an instant. The wave of energy continued, expanding outwards. It struck the 4 violet flames barrier. The legendary barrier, which was said to be impenetrable from the outside, did not shatter. It dissolved into motes of purple light, as if it had never been there at all. The wave washed over the rampaging sound and sand shinobi. It didn't kill them, but it ripped the chakra from their bodies, leaving them powerless, collapsing to the ground in heaps. The invasion was over. It had been ended in a single, silent, terrifying moment. In the cage box, Orochimaru stared, his jaw slack. He shoved Hiruzen aside and fled, leaping away into the smoke-filled city, not out of strategy, but out of pure, instinctual terror. Silence descended upon the ruined stadium. The only sound was the crackle of distant fires. Naruto stood in the center of the arena, the blue light fading from him. He looked at the devastation, at the cowering villagers, at the stunned shinobi. His expression was one of cold, grim resolution. He had shown his hand. He had revealed the power of the king. The world would never look at him the same way again. He turned to the first medics arriving on the scene. "See to the others first," he said, his voice calm, yet carrying the undeniable weight of command. He looked at the faces of his friends, his mentors, the cage, and the citizens. He saw their fear, but underneath it, he saw something new taking root. It was trust. It was awe. It was the look one gives to the storm that has saved them from the fire. Far away, in a dark tower in the rain-soaked village of Omegakure, a man with eyes of concentric purple circles, the Rinnegan, slowly opened them. He had felt the pulse of energy, a shockwave that had registered even across nations. It was a power that dwarfed all 9 Biju combined. "So," Pain said, his voice echoing in the chamber. "The king has finally made his gambit." His 6 bodies all turned their gaze towards a map of the land of fire. "The board has been cleared. It is time to make our move." Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4 Echoes of Monsters. The aftermath of the Konoha crush was unlike any in the village's history. In the past, such an attack would have been followed by months of grief, fear, and political instability. But this time, the smoke-filled air was laced with something else entirely. A profound and unsettling sense of awe. The initial terror of the invasion had been so utterly and completely eclipsed by the event that followed, it seemed almost like a distant prologue. The atomic pulse, as the few Jonin who witnessed it up close had dubbed it, had become the new calendar by which everything was measured. Rebuilding efforts began with an eerie efficiency. There was no panic, no despair. At the center of it all, a silent, gravitational force, was Naruto Uzumaki. He didn't bark orders or lead grand reconstruction projects. He simply existed. He would stand on a half-repaired rooftop, observing the work, and his presence alone was enough to instill a sense of calm and purpose in the workers below. He moved through the makeshift triage camps, and the wounded seemed to rest easier. He was no longer just a powerful shinobi. He had become a living symbol of Konoha's invincibility, a protective deity walking among his people. The fear was still there, lurking in the back of their minds, but it was a reverent fear, the kind one feels for a thunderstorm that has just saved the fields from a devastating fire. While the village mended its physical wounds, Jiraiya was tasked with healing its political one. The third Hokage was alive, but the council, shaken to its core, had agreed with Hiruzen's own assessment. A new, stronger leader was needed to navigate the treacherous world that Naruto's existence had created. And there was only one candidate. Jiraiya, accompanied by Hiruzen's most trusted Enbu guard and a quiet, dark-haired woman named Shizune, found Tsunade's Senju in Tanzaku Quarters, a town famous for its casinos and hedonistic pleasures. He found her exactly where he expected to, losing spectacularly at a dice game, a sake bottle in her hand and a mountain of debt collectors hovering nearby. "Still running from your ghosts, Haim?" Jiraiya said, his voice cutting through the din of the gambling den. Tsunade, one of the legendary Sannin, the world's greatest medical nin and granddaughter of the first Hokage, looked up. Her face, thanks to a transformation jutsu, was that of a young woman, but her eyes held a century of loss and cynicism. "Jiraiya, come to drag me back to that cursed village?" She slurred, throwing the dice. "Snake eyes. Again. I'm not interested." "This isn't about the village needing a Hokage, Tsunade," Jiraiya said, his tone serious, pulling her away from the table. Shizune quickly paid off the debts with a weary sigh. "This is about the world changing." He told her everything. The attack, Hiruzen's survival, Orochimaru's obsession. But those were just details. He then told her about Naruto. Not as Minato's son, but as the vessel of a primordial king. He described the power that had leveled a monster and shattered the unbreakable barrier. Tsunade listened, her drunken haze slowly evaporating, replaced by a sharp, analytical focus. "A new Jinchuriki. The Kyuubi's power has never been that." "He's not a Jinchuriki," Jiraiya interrupted, his voice low. "The Kyuubi is a puppy compared to what's inside this boy." The reports from the energy pulse he released, Tsunade, it registered on seismographs as far away as Iwa. It didn't just destroy, it deconstructed matter at a molecular level. It's a power that spits on the laws of ninjutsu. That was what broke through her cynicism. Not sentiment, not duty to her grandfather's legacy, but the raw, scientific impossibility of it all. A power that rewrote the rules of their world. Her instincts as a master of chakra and life itself were screaming at her. She had to see it. She had to understand it. "Fine," she said, her voice sober and sharp. "I'll come back. I will see this monster you've raised in our stead." Her return to Konoha was met with a mixture of hope and trepidation by the council. Her first official meeting as the candidate for Godem Hokage was a tense affair in the half-repaired council chambers. She sat at the head of the table, exuding an aura of command that had been dormant for years. The main topic, of course, was Naruto. Danzo Shimura, the hawk-faced leader of the shadowy root organization, spoke first. "The boy is a threat. His power is absolute and unchecked. He ended the invasion, yes, but what is to stop him from turning that same power on us if he deems it necessary? He must be controlled. My root division has the methods, the training, to ensure his loyalty, to make him the perfect weapon for Konoha." A cold silence fell over the room. The implications of what Danzo was suggesting, a brutal, psychological reconditioning, were horrifying. Before Tsunade could unleash the blistering tirade that was building in her chest, a calm voice spoke from the corner of the room where he had been standing in silence. "And who, Lord Danzo?" Naruto asked, his voice quiet yet echoing with immense weight, "would you send to check me?" Every eye turned to him. He stood with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. He wasn't being defiant. He wasn't threatening them. He was asking a simple, logical, and utterly unanswerable question. Who in their village, who on the entire continent, possessed the power to enforce their will upon him? The Jonin commanders, The clan heads, even Tsunade herself, knew the answer was no one. Danzo's visible eye twitched. The boy had disarmed him with a single sentence, exposing his argument as posturing. He had no leverage. He was a man with a cage trying to threaten a dragon. Naruto's gaze swept the room, meeting the eyes of Hiyashi Hyuga, Shikaku Nara, and the other clan heads. My loyalty is not in question. This village is my territory. Its people are my charge. I defended it. I will always defend it. You do not need to control me. You need to trust me. He then looked at Tsunade, a silent challenge in his eyes. And you, Tsunade Senju, need to lead them. The Hokage's hat is more than a symbol. It is a responsibility. Are you prepared to accept it? Tsunade stared back at him, momentarily stunned. The boy was endorsing her, but also testing her, demanding she rise to the occasion. This wasn't a Jinchuriki weapon. This was a political player, a king asserting the new shape of his court. A slow, genuine smirk spread across her face. This was going to be interesting. I accept, she said, her voice ringing with renewed authority. In the days that followed, as Tsunade officially took office and began the monumental task of leadership, Naruto found a moment of peace. The village was healing. Scaffolding crisscrossed the buildings, the sounds of hammers and saws replacing the screams of battle. He stood atop the Hokage monument, on his father's stone head, looking out over the valley. He felt a presence approach, soft and hesitant, yet with a core of newfound strength.
Hinata, he said, without turning. Naruto-kun, she replied, her voice soft but steady. She came to stand beside him, her usual blush absent, replaced by a serene gratitude. I wanted to thank you. For saving us. For saving everyone.
I did what was necessary, he said, his gaze still on the village. No, she insisted, taking a small step closer. You did more than that. That day, in the arena, you saved me, too. Not from the enemy, but from myself. She looked at her hands. For my entire life, I believed what my father said. That I was weak, a failure. But you told me my gentleness was a strength. You saw something in me that no one else did, not even myself. You opened the door to my cage.
He finally turned to look at her. The setting sun caught in her dark hair, and her pale lavender eyes shone with a sincerity that was as pure and profound as anything he had ever seen. In a world of politics, shadows, and monstrous power, she was a point of quiet, unshakable truth. She admired him not for his power, but for the good he chose to do with it. She was his sanctuary.
Moved by a force deeper than strategy or strength, he reached out and gently cupped her cheek. Her skin was soft, and she leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering close. He leaned in and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was not one of fiery passion or challenging dominance. It was gentle, soft, a quiet promise in the twilight. It was a moment of absolute peace, a grounding force that reminded him of the humanity he fought to protect. When they broke apart, Hinata's face was a beautiful shade of scarlet, but her eyes were bright with a happiness so radiant it could have outshone the sun. She didn't need to say anything. He didn't either. In that silent moment, a bond was forged, deeper and more real than any other. The peace was short-lived. A week later, Naruto was meditating on the outskirts of the village, near the memorial stone where Kakashi so often lost himself. He was expanding his senses, feeling the lifeblood of the land of fire, when he felt two new presences enter his sensory domain. They were powerful, alien, and they reeked of blood and shadow. They were moving with purpose. They were hunting him. He stood, waiting. Two figures emerged from the tree line. One was a tall, hulking man with blue, shark-like skin, carrying a massive, bandaged sword on his back. The other was slighter, with long black hair and eyes that held a profound, chilling emptiness. They both wore black cloaks adorned with red clouds. Akatsuki. Well, what do we have here? The shark man, Kisame Hoshigaki, grinned, revealing rows of pointed teeth. Looks like we found our little stray kitten. Itachi-san, is this really the kid who caused all that fuss? Itachi Uchiha said nothing. His dark eyes were fixed on Naruto, analytical and cold. He could feel it, the immense, sleeping ocean of power within the boy. It was far greater than the reports had suggested. I am Naruto Uzumaki, Naruto said, his voice calm, betraying no fear. You are a long way from home. We're here to bring you home with us, Kisame chuckled, resting his hand on the hilt of his bandaged blade. Samahata. We can do this the easy way, or we can do this the fun way. I vote for the fun way. He lunged forward, swinging the massive Samahata with enough force to shatter boulders. The blade whistled through the air, aimed to pulp Naruto into the ground. Naruto didn't move. He simply raised a hand. The instant Samahata came within a foot of Naruto's body, the living sword let out a piercing, high-pitched shriek. It was a sound of pure agony and terror. The bandages around it writhed, and the sword itself visibly recoiled, curving in midair to avoid touching Naruto as if he were coated in acid. Kisame stumbled, his eyes wide with disbelief. What? Samahata, what's wrong with you? He tried to force the blade forward, but it resisted, trembling violently. Your sword eats chakra, Naruto stated, his voice flat. But my chakra is not something to be eaten. To your blade, it is poison. It is radiation. It would rather starve than take a single bite. Kisame stared, his bravado evaporating. His greatest weapon, the blade that made him a match for any Biju, was utterly terrified of this boy. Itachi stepped forward, his expression unreadable. Kisame. Fall back. His eyes shifted, the black tomo in their crimson depths spinning and merging into the three-bladed pinwheel of the Mangekyo Sharingan. This requires a more delicate touch. Tsukuyomi. The world dissolved. Pav switch. Itachi Uchiha. Itachi was the master of illusion, the god of a mental world where he controlled time, space, and reality itself. He had plunged countless strong shinobi into this nightmare realm, shattering their minds in what felt like an eternity but lasted only a second in the real world. He expected to find the boy's mind, a consciousness he could trap, torture, and break. He was not prepared for what he found. He did not find a mind, he found a universe. He was no longer in control. He was adrift, a tiny speck of consciousness in an endless, black, primordial ocean that stretched to an infinite horizon. The water was not water, it was thick, heavy, ancient thought. Above him, there was no sun, no moon, no stars, only a swirling, malevolent vortex of black light that felt like the eye of a sleeping, angry god. The pressure was immense, not physical, but existential. It threatened to crush his very soul, to dissolve his sense of self into the vast, alien consciousness that surrounded him. This was not the mind of Naruto Uzumaki, this was the mind of Gojira. He tried to exert his will, to form his world of crosses and suffering, but his thoughts were like pebbles tossed into an ocean. They vanished without a ripple. A low, resonant hum began to vibrate through the endless sea, the thought patterns of the entity he had disturbed. It was not hostile. It was annoyed. It regarded his presence as a gnat, an insignificant bacterium in its system. Then, the eye in the sky opened. It was not an eye of flesh, but an eye of pure, burning, atomic blue energy. It fixed on him, and in that gaze, Itachi Uchiha, the prodigy, the clan killer, the master of the Mangekyo Sharingan, felt a terror so absolute it transcended the physical. He saw the birth and death of stars. He saw continents shift and oceans boil. He saw eons pass in the blink of an eye. He saw a power so ancient and vast that the concept of a Biju was a child's fairy tale. His mind couldn't handle it. The perfect, unbreakable prison of his Tsukuyomi shattered from the inside out. The psychic backlash was a physical force, a spear of pure cosmic horror that lanced back through his optic nerve and into his brain. Pav end! Itachi screamed. It was a raw, choked-off sound of pure agony. He staggered back, clutching his head, blood pouring freely from his right eye. The world swam back into focus, the trees, the sky, his partner Kisame staring in shock. Naruto stood before him, his expression unchanged, as if nothing had happened. My Tsukuyomi, Itachi gasped, his body trembling uncontrollably. His greatest weapon had not just failed, it had been turned against him, broken by a mind too vast and too alien to be contained. An interesting illusion, Naruto commented, his voice devoid of malice. But my mind is not my own to be trapped. He moved. He flowed forward, a gentle, unstoppable tide. Kisame, recovering his senses, moved to intercept, but Naruto was already past him. He appeared before Itachi and placed a hand on his shoulder. It was not a strike, but the pressure was immense, forcing the Uchiha prodigy to his knees. Tell your leader, Pain, Naruto said, his voice low and clear, that the Biju are a part of this world's natural order. His hunt is an act of imbalance. And I am the force that corrects imbalance. Tell him to cease his hunt. This is his only warning. He released Itachi and stepped back. He looked at the two of them, two of the most feared S-rank criminals in the world, now utterly defeated without him having thrown a single punch. He had not come here to kill them. He had come to send a message. Go, Naruto said. Kisame, for the first time in his life, did not argue. He grabbed his shaking, injured partner and vanished into the trees, fleeing not from a fight they had lost, but from a power they could not comprehend.
Itachi, as they fled, risked a glance back. He saw the boy standing by the memorial stone, a silent guardian for the names carved there. He saw the setting sun haloing his blonde hair, and he realized, with a soul-shattering clarity, that his entire plan for Sasuke, his entire path of sacrifice and darkness, had been built on a false premise. He had been trying to prepare his brother for a world of powerful shinobi. He had failed to prepare him for a world with a god in it.
Naruto stood before the new Hokage and the Toad Sage in her office. The sun had set, and the room was lit by a single lamp, casting long shadows. He had just finished recounting his encounter with the Akatsuki. Tsunade was silent, her fingers steepled before her, her mind trying to process the impossible. Jiraiya looked grim, a deep furrow in his brow. You broke Itachi's Tsukuyomi, by just being there? Tsunade finally asked, her voice a strained whisper.
His genjutsu requires a comprehensible mind to function. Mine is complex, Naruto replied with masterful understatement.
And you let them go? Jiraiya pressed. Naruto, they're S-rank criminals. Killing them would have achieved nothing, Naruto countered calmly. It would have been swatting two flies while ignoring the nest. Pain, their leader, would have simply sent others. Now, he has a message. He knows who I am. He knows that I am aware of him. He knows that his plan is no longer operating in the shadows. He looked at them both, his blue eyes holding an ancient, weary wisdom. The Akatsuki believe they are the apex predators, hunting down scattered beasts to power their utopia. They don't understand the ecosystem they're disrupting. He walked to the window, looking out at the lights of his village. They're not just trying to catch a fox, Jiraiya. They're not just trying to cage a monster, he said, his voice low but filled with an iron certainty that sent a shiver down both Sannin's spines. They're trying to become God, and I'm in their way. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5 The King and His Court. The week following the Akatsuki's failed incursion was one of tense, coiled silence in the Hokage's tower. The message Naruto had sent via Itachi and Kisame had been delivered, a stone tossed into the dark well of the criminal underworld. Now, they listened for the echo. Reports from Jiraiya's spy network confirmed a sudden and dramatic halt in known Akatsuki movements. They were regrouping, reassessing. They were afraid. But Naruto knew fear was a temporary deterrent. It would soon curdle into calculated rage. Waiting for the enemy to recover was a luxury they could not afford. He stood before Tsunade and Jiraiya in the Hokage's office. The morning light streamed through the large window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. On the table between them was a map of the elemental nations, dotted with markers indicating the last known locations of Akatsuki members. A defensive posture is a losing one, Naruto stated, his voice cutting through the quiet room with the sharp finality of a blade. We've been reacting to Orochimaru, to the Sand and Sound, to the Akatsuki. We have been defending. But the greatest defense is an overwhelming offense. We need to hunt them before they finish whatever plan they're hatching. Tsunade leaned back in her chair, a tumbler of whiskey in her hand despite the early hour. A shinobi squad hunting the entire Akatsuki? That's not a hunt, Naruto, that's suicide. We're talking about 10 S-rank missing nin, each one a cage-level threat. You are thinking in terms of shinobi squads, Naruto countered, tapping a finger on the map. I am not a shinobi. I am a deterrent, but a deterrent is useless if it stays locked in its silo. We will not send a squad. We will send a statement. He looked at Tsunade, his blue eyes holding a fire that belied his calm demeanor. Authorize it, Hokage-sama. Give me a small, elite unit under my direct command. Not a Konoha team, but my team. We will be a scalpel, not a hammer. We will cut the cancer out before it spreads. Jiraiya watched the exchange, a slow grin spreading across his face. This was it. The boy was no longer just accepting his power, he was wielding it as a political and military tool. He was taking command of his own destiny. Tsunade studied Naruto for a long, silent moment. She saw the iron will, the unshakable logic, the sheer force of presence that made refusal seem like an act of foolishness. She took a long drink from her tumbler, the ice clinking against the glass. "Fine," she said, setting the glass down with a decisive thud. "You can have your unit. The Guardian Unit. Let's call it. But every member must be approved by me. Who do you want for this suicide squad of yours?" Naruto didn't hesitate, he had already chosen his court. His first stop was the Uchiha compound. He found Sasuke in his family's old dojo, practicing his katana forms. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and the ghosts of a massacred clan. Sasuke moved with a deadly grace, his new speed a blur, but his eyes held a familiar, lonely darkness. "The Akatsuki will be our primary target," Naruto said, his voice cutting through the hiss of Sasuke's blade. "I am forming a unit to hunt them. I want you in it." Sasuke stopped, his chest heaving slightly. He turned, his Sharingan blazing. "Why?" "Because your eyes see what others cannot," Naruto replied, meeting his gaze. "Because your Chidori is the sharpest spear in Konoha's arsenal. Because I need a blade that can strike with the speed of lightning, guided by my strategy." He took a step closer. "I am the unmovable shield, the overwhelming force. But I need a sword. I need your skill, Sasuke. I am not asking you to follow me. I am asking you to stand with me." Sasuke stared at him, the words echoing in the empty dojo. "Stand with me." It wasn't a plea for friendship. It wasn't a demand for subordination. It was an acknowledgement of his power, of his worth. Naruto was offering him a purpose beyond the hollow pursuit of revenge against Itachi. He was offering him a place at the right hand of a king, a chance to use his cursed power to protect the world, not just destroy one man. Sasuke grunted, a flicker of a smirk touching his lips. He sheathed his katana. "Try to keep up." Next was Sakura. He found her in the hospital, her pink hair tied back, her hands glowing with green medical chakra as she healed a chunin injured during the invasion. She worked with a focused intensity that was breathtaking. He waited until she was finished. She looked up, wiping a bead of sweat from her brow, and her tired face broke into a small smile when she saw him. "Sakura," he said, "I'm forming a new unit. I need you as our head medic." Her smile faltered slightly. "A medic? Naruto, my skills are..." "Your skills," he interrupted gently but firmly, "are the most important asset we will have. Sasuke and I can destroy. But we cannot create. We cannot heal. You are the guardian of our lives. When we are on the battlefield, facing down immortal killers and monsters, you will be the anchor that keeps us from being dragged into the abyss. Strength is useless if we bleed out in the dirt. You are not a support member, Sakura. You are the heart of this team. Without you, the unit fails. Without you, we die." Sakura's green eyes widened, shimmering with unshed tears. He saw her not as a liability, not as the girl who needed protecting, but as the core of their strength. He trusted her, relied on her, with an intensity that made her feel more powerful than any destructive ninjutsu ever could. "I won't let you down," she said, her voice thick with emotion but her gaze as hard as steel. Hinata was next. He requested her presence at a private training ground. She arrived, no longer trembling in his presence, but with a quiet dignity she had earned. "Hinata, I need your eyes," he said, getting straight to the point. "Your Byakugan sees through deception, through stealth, through darkness. In the field, you will be our compass and our watchtower. Your gentle fist is the perfect counter to opponents who rely on brute force. You can disable an enemy without killing them, a tactical advantage that is immeasurable." He saw a flicker of the old doubt in her eyes. "But, am I strong enough to fight beside you and Sasuke-kun?" He stepped closer, his presence a comforting warmth. "I have a man who can shatter mountains and a woman who can command the winds in my corner. I have a medic who can cheat death and a swordsman who bathed in blood. And yet, I am coming to you. You are strong enough, Hinata. Now, you just need to believe it, as I do." She looked up at him, at the absolute conviction in his eyes, and the last of her self-doubt withered and died. She gave him a firm, respectful bow. "I will be your eyes, Naruto-kun." His final stop was a secure Enbu compound, where Zabuza, Momochi and Haku were being held in comfortable but heavily guarded confinement. Naruto dismissed the guards, entering the room alone. Zabuza was sharpening a new, custom-forged blade. Haku was tending to a small plant by the window.
They both immediately dropped to one knee upon his entry.
"My lord," Zabuza said, his voice a low rumble of reverence. "Stand," Naruto commanded. "I am not here as your lord. I am here as your commander. I have been authorized to form a unit to hunt the Akatsuki. Your old life is over. I am offering you a new one. A life of purpose, fighting real monsters, under my banner. Your skills in silent killing and assassination are unmatched. I have need of them." Haku looked up, his soft features alight with a hope he hadn't felt in years. "You would trust us? After everything?" "I do not trust the demon of the mist," Naruto said, his gaze locking with Zabuza's. "I trust the man who knelt before me on that bridge. I trust the boy who was willing to die for him. Your loyalty is not to Konoha. It is to me. That is all I require." He turned to leave. "Be ready in 1 hour." That evening, the Guardian unit assembled for the first time. Naruto, Sasuke, Sakura, Hinata, Zabuza, and Haku. A king, his sword, his heart, his eyes, and his 2 shadows. It was a team of terrifying potential, bound together by loyalty to the god in their midst. The following weeks were a blur of intense, synergistic training. Naruto was a brilliant, if unorthodox, commander. He pushed them to their limits and beyond, forcing them to unlearn their individualistic styles and operate as a single, cohesive entity. He had Zabuza shroud the entire training ground in his hidden mist jutsu, creating a zero-visibility environment. Inside the mist, he pitted them against each other. But Hinata, with her Byakugan, could see everything. She became their nerve center, calling out positions and attack vectors through a small, encrypted earpiece designed by the Konoha Tech Division. Sasuke, target at 7 o'clock, moving fast, Haku. 3 decoys approaching your left flank. The real one is above you. Her calm voice would echo. Guided by her, Sasuke became a phantom, his Chidori a blade of lightning that appeared from nowhere to strike with lethal precision. Haku's ice mirrors became an inescapable maze, a beautiful and deadly trap. Zabuza was the ghost in the machine, his silent killing techniques used to herd and separate targets. Sakura operated from a protected position, analyzing the mock battles, identifying weaknesses, and directing her teammates to exploit them.
Naruto acted as the command center and the final backstop. He would periodically enter the fray, his overwhelming presence and power forcing his entire team to work together to simply survive his controlled assault. He taught them how to fight not just as a team, but as an extension of his own will.
Their late-night strategy sessions were just as intense. In a secure bunker beneath the Hokage Tower, they would review intel from Jiraiya, planning their first hunt. Naruto's strategic acumen was astounding. He thought not in terms of battles, but in terms of psychological warfare. "Our first target will be Hidan and Kakuzu," he announced, pointing to their 2 markers on the map. "The immortal duo, from Tagakagure and Akigakure?" Sasuke questioned. "Why them? They're rumored to be unkillable." "Precisely," Naruto said, a cold glint in his eyes. "The Akatsuki believe they're beyond the reach of mortals. Hidan believes he is saved by his god. Kakuzu believes he has conquered death through his jutsu. They're arrogant. And they are the perfect symbol." He looked around at his team. "When we hunt them, we are not just killing 2 men. We are killing the very idea of immortality. We will send a message to the rest of the Akatsuki, and to anyone else watching. There is no jutsu, no god, no power that can shield you from me. Nothing is immortal." The weight of his words settled in the room. They were not just going on a mission. They were going to make a statement that would echo across the nations. During this period of intense preparation, the outside world continued to turn. Tamari of the Sand was still in Konoha, finalizing the details of a new, groundbreaking alliance between their villages, an alliance built almost entirely on the political gravity of Naruto's existence. She sought him out one evening, finding him alone at the edge of a training ground, looking up at the moon. The pretense of diplomacy fell away almost immediately. "You're really going through with it," she said, her voice a mixture of challenge and admiration, hunting them. "It's necessary," he replied, turning to face her. "Peace cannot be maintained from a defensive crouch. You're going to get yourself killed." "I'm not." His confidence was absolute, a fact of nature. The air between them crackled, the same intense energy from their spar flaring back to life. "You're arrogant," she said, taking a step closer, her teal eyes blazing. "I'm realistic," he countered, his own gaze intense. "There's a fine line," she whispered, now only inches from him. "Then let's cross it," he murmured. This time, there was no interruption. The kiss was a hurricane, a clash of two powerful, dominant wills who found an exhilarating release in one another. Her hands tangled in his blonde hair, his arms wrapped around her waist, lifting her effortlessly. It was not gentle or sweet. It was raw, hungry, a desperate and passionate confirmation that they were alike two forces of nature who rarely, if ever, met their equal. It was a kiss that left them both breathless and marked, a silent pact of mutual, fiery respect. His quiet moments were reserved for others. He found Sakura late one night in the hospital library, poring over advanced medical texts. He simply sat with her, a silent, comforting presence. "You should rest, Sakura," he said softly. "I can't," she admitted, not looking up from her book. "You're all putting your lives in my hands. I have to be better. I have to be perfect." He reached out and gently closed the book. Her surprised eyes met his. "You already are," he said with utter sincerity. "I trust you. That's all the perfection I need." The simple, powerful truth of his words washed away her anxiety, replacing it with a warm, steady calm. She knew, in that moment, she would die for him. Not out of infatuation, but out of a loyalty so profound it had become a part of her soul. The day came. The Guardian unit moved out, a shadow slipping from Konoha's gates unnoticed. They traveled fast and light, a ghost contingent moving through the land of fire. Guided by Jiraiya's intel, they tracked their targets to a desolate, rocky region in the land of hot water, a place known for its steam vents and godless shrines. They found them at an old, abandoned bounty station. Kakuzu was counting a thick wad of cash. Hidan was performing some sort of ritual over the corpse of a local monk. Targets acquired, Hinata whispered into her earpiece from her concealed position a mile away. No other signatures detected. "Commence the operation," Naruto's voice replied, calm and clear in their ears. Zabuza was the first to act. A thick, chilling mist rolled into the clearing, swallowing the bounty station in seconds. "What's this now?" Kakuzu grumbled, his masked face turning. "A sacrifice from Jashin." Hidan cackled, grabbing his massive three-bladed scythe. The attack was a symphony of coordinated chaos. Guided by Hinata's Byakugan vision, Haku's demonic ice mirrors materialized around Hidan, trapping him in a beautiful cage of death. Simultaneously, Sasuke, a black lightning bolt in the mist, shot towards Kakuzu, his hand ablaze with the chirping energy of the Chidori. POV switch. Sasuke Uchiha. The world was a swirling gray vortex, but in his mind, Hinata's voice was a crystal-clear map. "Kakuzu is hardening his arm. Dodge left." Sasuke twisted, Kakuzu's diamond-hard fist grazing his hair. The sheer force of the mist blow shattered the ground. This monster was strong. But Sasuke was faster. He has 4 chakra signatures on his back, plus his own. They're like hearts. Go for the one on the upper right. It's a lightning nature. Sakura's analytical voice cut in, having observed the initial clash. This was it. The synergy they had drilled relentlessly. It was exhilarating. He was not a lone avenger. He was the tip of a spear, a precision instrument wielded by a perfectly coordinated team. He felt a sense of purpose so profound it eclipsed his hatred, his loneliness, his pain. This was what he was meant for. Not to surpass Naruto, but to be an indispensable part of his world-shaking power. To be the king's sword. He feinted high, then dropped low, his Chidori carving a blazing arc through the mist. He struck the back of Kakuzu's shoulder, the lightning jutsu tearing through flesh and cloth. There was a screech of dying energy, and one of the masks on Kakuzu's back crumbled into dust. "You brat!" Kakuzu roared, black threads erupting from his body. But Sasuke was already gone, vanishing back into the mist, a phantom waiting for the next command, a fierce grin of triumph on his face. POV end. While Sasuke harassed Kakuzu, Hidan was trapped. He swung his scythe wildly, but Haku, moving between the mirrors, was untouchable. Hidan finally nicked him, getting the blood he needed. He quickly drew Jashin's symbol on the ground and impaled himself. Now you feel the pain. The ultimate pain of death, he shrieked with glee. Nothing happened. Haku, unharmed, watched him from a mirror. The Haku he had struck was a water clone Zabuza had created. Blasphemer! Hidan screamed, realizing he'd been tricked. It was then that Naruto walked out of the mist and into Hidan's ritual circle. He looked at the Jushinist, his expression one of utter disinterest. Your god is weak, and your faith is misplaced, Naruto said calmly. You dare mock Lord Jashin? I'll send you to him myself. Hidan lunged, his scythe arcing towards Naruto's neck. Naruto didn't even flinch. He caught the massive weapon by its shaft, his grip stopping it dead. With his other hand, he grabbed Hidan by the face. Let me show you what a real god looks like. His eyes began to glow. A high-pitched whine filled the air. He opened his mouth, and a focused, point-blank beam of blue atomic breath erupted, engulfing Hidan completely. There was no scream. There was no explosion. There was only a brief, brilliant flash of blue light. When it faded, Hidan was gone. His scythe fell to the ground, clattering on the rocks. But there was no ash, no blood, no charred remains. There was nothing. He had been erased from existence. Kakuzu, who had just flung Sasuke away, froze. His 4 remaining hearts hammered in his chest. He saw what had happened. He had seen a man not killed, but unmade. Primal terror, an emotion he had not felt in nearly a century, gripped him. He turned to run. He found his path blocked by Naruto. The blonde boy stood there, the faint blue glow receding from his eyes. You have 2 choices, Naruto said, his voice a low, cold hum. You can give me the information I want about the Akatsuki. Or you can join your partner in oblivion. I'll take my chances. Kakuzu roared, his body exploding into a storm of black threads and masked monsters. Naruto simply walked forward into the storm. The threads lashed at him, but they couldn't pierce his skin. The elemental attacks from the mask's fire, wind, lightning washed over him, having no effect. He reached out, grabbed the main body, and with a grunt of effort, ripped the masked hearts right off Kakuzu's back. No! Kakuzu screamed in horror. Naruto held the 4 squirming, screeching masks in one hand and squeezed. They imploded, their stolen life force dissipating with a final, pathetic whimper. Kakuzu's body convulsed and collapsed, a dried-out husk. The immortal duo was no more. The mist cleared. The Guardian unit assembled around Naruto, all of them unharmed. They stood victorious, having perfectly executed a flawless mission. Naruto looked at the lifeless husk of Kakuzu at his feet. Then he looked up at the empty sky. He could feel it again, that cold, geometric gaze from the heavens. It was stronger now, more focused. A feeling of appraisal. Of judgment. They're watching, he said quietly to his team. Far away, in a place beyond space and time, a realm of impossible architecture and cold, white light, a serene figure sat on a throne carved from what looked like solidified moonlight. Its features were androgynous, its form draped in white, and its eyes were pools of molten gold. Other, similar figures stood in attendance, their forms indistinct. The aberration has become self-aware, the enthroned figure spoke, its voice a chorus of harmonious, chilling tones that echoed without a source. It is no longer a passive container. It is establishing its own dominion, purging lesser predators from its territory. The golden eyes narrowed, a flicker of cosmic annoyance crossing the serene face. The correction can no longer be delayed. The age of mortals is over. It is time to sterilize the board. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The King's Decree. The return of the Guardian unit was not a triumphant procession. They slipped back into Konoha as they had left like ghosts, their mission's success known only to the highest echelons of command. But news of the impossible traveled faster than any shinobi. When word leaked from the bounty offices that the infamous immortal duo, Kakuzu and Hidan, had simply vanished, their names wiped from the bingo books with a final, terrified note from an Iowa informant about a blue light that unmade the undying, the shinobi world held its breath. The Akatsuki, the boogeymen of the 5 great nations, were being hunted. The balance of fear in the world had been irrevocably broken, shattered by the boy king of Konoha. Naruto, however, felt no triumph. Victory was a hollow thing. As he stood in the Hokage's office, the faint, metallic scent of ozone still clinging to him,
He could feel the celestial gaze he'd felt in the land of hot water. It was no longer a passive observation. It was a cold, calculating glare. He had stepped out of the shadows, and in doing so, had painted a target on his entire world.
They will retaliate, Naruto stated, his voice devoid of emotion. He was looking at the Akatsuki markers on the great map. Pain, their leader. He will not take this as a warning. He will take it as a declaration of war. He will come for me. He will come for Konoha. Jiraiya, leaning against the wall, looked grim. The network is already reporting that Pain has recalled all active members. They're consolidating in a megacure. He's planning something big. Then we will not wait for the storm to break. We will build a fortress to withstand it, Tsunade declared, slamming her fist on the table. Her brief time as Hokage had stripped away her cynicism, replacing it with a fierce, leonine resolve. The village's barrier systems are already at maximum. What more can we do? Reinforce them, Naruto said, walking towards the window overlooking his village, with me. For the next 3 days, Konoha transformed. It was not a panicked scramble, but a disciplined, purposeful preparation for a siege. Naruto became the linchpin of the entire defense. He stood at the 4 cardinal points of the village's main perimeter barrier, working with the elite barrier corps. The shinobi watched in awe as he placed his hands on the great seals, not pushing chakra into them in the conventional sense, but weaving his own primordial, atomic energy into the very matrix of the Fuinjutsu. The effect was immediate and profound. The transparent barrier took on a faint, ethereal blue hum. The air within the village grew still, charged with a clean, heavy pressure that was immensely comforting to its inhabitants but would be oppressive to any intruder. It was as if the sky itself had become a shield. Weaker summons would likely disintegrate upon contact. Intruders would feel the weight of a mountain pressing on their chakra systems, their strength and speed drastically reduced. Naruto had not just fortified Konoha. He had claimed it, marking it as his territory on a fundamental, energetic level. The strategic planning was a masterclass in proactive defense. In the Hokage's war room, Naruto, Tsunade, and Shikaku Nara, whose intellect was as legendary as his laziness, spent hours poring over maps. Pain's primary ability, based on Jiraiya's reports from his former student, is control over 6 bodies with a shared vision, Shikaku deduced, a plume of smoke rising from his cigarette. He'll likely attack from multiple angles at once to cause chaos and confusion. It's a troublesome strategy. Then we deny him that chaos, Naruto countered, placing pieces on the map. He expects to face a standard shinobi village. We will present him with a unified organism. The clan heads will coordinate their own sectors. The Hyuga will provide 360-degree surveillance. The Aburame will create a network of Kakaichu to detect intruders on a microscopic level. The Yamanaka will link the minds of all sector commanders for instantaneous communication. He looked at Tsunade. The Guardian unit will not be on the front lines. We will be a mobile reserve, a scalpel to be deployed to the most critical threats, with me as the final deterrent. It was a brilliant, cohesive plan. Naruto wasn't just thinking like a weapon. He was thinking like a king defending his realm. As he walked through the village streets, he could see the effect of his preparations. The civilians were not hiding in their homes. They were training, sharpening tools, reinforcing doors, but there was no fear in their eyes. They would look up as he passed, and a sense of calm would follow in his wake. They trusted the hum of the blue barrier. They trusted the resolve of their Hokage. But most of all, they trusted him. Their faith was a palpable force, a shield as strong as any jutsu. On the 4th day, it happened. A sensor nin in the barrier core screamed, his eyes wide. 6 signatures. Unbelievably powerful. They just appeared inside the perimeter, high altitude. Before panic could set in, the 6 figures, the 6 paths of pain plummeted towards the village. The moment they passed through the outer layer of Naruto's reinforced barrier, the effect hit them. The air became thick as water, a crushing pressure assaulting their chakra networks. Their descent, meant to be a terrifying, high-speed blitz, slowed as if they were moving through molasses. The animal path performed her summoning jutsu. A monstrous, multi-headed dog, a giant drill-beaked bird, a colossal crustacean, they materialized in the sky, roaring down on the village. They crashed against the main dome of the blue barrier. There was no explosion. The creatures shrieked in agony as the atomic chakra in the barrier began to unmake them. their forms dissolving into black smoke and dissipating harmlessly. The Asura Path, a mechanized body bristling with weaponry, fired a volley of chakra rockets at the Hokage Tower. They detonated against the barrier with a dull thud, the explosions snuffed out by the oppressive blue energy. Pain, observing through his linked vision, felt a flicker of surprise. The village had not fallen into chaos. It had not even flinched. His shock and awe tactics, designed to cripple a nation's morale in seconds, had been rendered utterly impotent. From the ground, disciplined squads of Konoha shinobi, already in position, launched counter-attacks, engaging the slowed paths with brutal efficiency. But this was just the opening gambit. The true threat, the Diva Path, landed gracefully in the village center, the epicenter of the rebuilt stadium district. This was Yahiko's body, the leader. He floated a few feet off the ground, his face cold and impassive, his purple, concentric ringed eyes gazing upon the village he intended to judge. He raised his hands. "The world," he said, his voice amplified by chakra, ringing out across the village, "shall know pain." He was about to unleash the almighty push, a gravitational wave that would blast Konoha into a crater. "No," a calm voice said from behind him, "it won't." The Diva Path turned. Naruto stood there, not 20 feet away, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. He had appeared without a sound, without a flicker of chakra. "Naruto Uzumaki," the Diva Path stated, "the source of all this pain. You will be the first to be judged." He thrust his hands forward. Shinra Tensai. A wave of invisible, irresistible gravitational force erupted from him. The ground buckled, buildings groaned, the very air was compressed into a wall of destruction moving at impossible speeds. It was a jutsu that could repel anything, that could level a city in an instant. It hit Naruto, and it stopped. Naruto did not fly back. He did not explode. He stood his ground. His blonde hair was whipped back by the force, and the ground beneath his feet fractured into a crater 50 feet wide, but he did not move a single inch. A brilliant blue aura of atomic chakra flared to life around him, a shield of pure, fundamental force pushing back against the Diva Path's gravity. He had become a living mountain, an anchor point in reality that refused to yield. The unstoppable force had just met the immovable object. The shockwave from the two colliding forces erupted sideways and upwards, a colossal, silent explosion of energy that shattered windows for miles around but left the area directly behind Naruto completely untouched. He had shielded the heart of his village with his own body. The Diva Path's eyes widened in genuine shock. This was impossible. Nothing could resist the almighty push. "My turn," Naruto said, the blue aura flaring brighter. He lunged. The fight that followed was not one of ninjutsu. It was a battle of gods. Every time Naruto's fist met the Diva Path's defenses, a shockwave leveled a nearby building. Every time the Diva Path used his gravitational powers to pull or push, Naruto's sheer mass and power negated it. It was a brutal, earth-shaking ballet of destruction. The Diva Path, seeing his powers failing, used his final resort, Shibaku Tensai. He created a black sphere, a gravitational core that shot into the sky, pulling rock and earth from the ground to form a miniature moon, intending to trap Naruto within it. Naruto simply looked up at the growing celestial body, and for the first time, a flicker of annoyance crossed his face. He raised a hand, and from his palm, a thin, hyper-focused beam of his atomic breath shot upwards. It struck the black core, and instead of a massive explosion, the gravitational center simply imploded, neutralized. The tons of rock and debris that had been pulled into the sky rained back down harmlessly into the already destroyed stadium district. Naruto appeared before the stunned Diva Path, whose 5-second interval between abilities left him completely vulnerable. "It's over," Naruto said. He didn't punch him. He simply placed his palm on the Diva Path's chest. A surge of raw, physical force, amplified by his atomic chakra, pulsed through the body. It didn't explode. It crumpled, every bone turning to dust, every system failing at once. The body of Yahiko collapsed into a heap of empty robes. But Naruto wasn't looking at the defeated puppet. His eyes were closed, his head tilted as if listening to a distant sound. His connection to nature, amplified to a godlike degree by his own innate sage mode, could feel it now. The massive, singular source of chakra outside the village, broadcasting its will. The puppeteer. He vanished. In a massive, artificial tree constructed of paper on a high cliff overlooking the village, Nagato Uzumaki, his emaciated body hooked into a bizarre mechanical walker, coughed up blood. The destruction of his diva path had sent a massive backlash through his system. Beside him, the blue-haired, paper-winged Conan looked on, her face a mask of worry. A section of the paper tree dissolved, and Naruto stepped into their sanctuary as if walking through an open door. He looked at the emaciated redhead, the black rods piercing his back, the dead, Rinnegan eyes, and then at Conan. Nagato Uzumaki, Naruto said, his voice quiet, the man behind the curtain. So you found me, Nagato rasped, a faint, pained smile on his lips. It does not matter. My vision will live on. You cannot understand my pain. You who have been blessed with so much power, what could you know of loss? He began his speech, the practiced, passionate sermon about his childhood, the death of his parents, the loss of Yahiko, the cycle of hatred. He spoke of his plan to use the Biju to create a weapon that would force the world into an era of peace born from terror. Naruto listened. Patiently. Silently. He let Nagato pour out all of his pain, all of his twisted philosophy. When he was finished, the chamber was silent save for Nagato's ragged breathing. Your pain is real, Nagato, Naruto said, his voice filled not with contempt, but with a profound, sorrowful empathy that shocked them both. I understand it better than you think. But your answer is wrong. Your peace is a lie. A lie? Nagato scoffed. It is the only truth this wretched world understands? No, Naruto said, stepping closer. It is the answer of a child lashing out in a dark room, trying to make the other children behave by becoming the biggest monster. But you are not the biggest monster, Nagato. You are not even close. He reached out a hand. Let me show you. Pav switch. Conan. Conan moved to intercept him, a thousand paper shuriken forming around her. But she stopped. The look in Naruto's eyes was not one of aggression. It was one of terrible, ancient certainty. Naruto placed his hand on Nagato's forehead. He didn't recoil or attack. The room was suddenly filled with an immense pressure, the same primordial aura that had shattered Itachi Uchiha's mind. But this was not an attack. It was an invitation. Conan, through her connection to Nagato, saw it too. A vision. Not a genjutsu, but a raw, unfiltered stream of consciousness. She saw a glimpse of what Itachi had seen, an infinite, black ocean under a vortex of cold, alien light. The mind of a sleeping god. Then, the vision shifted. She saw the world not from the ground, but from above. She felt the cold, calculating gaze of entities so vast and powerful that nations and shinobi were less than insects. She saw the moon, and felt it not as a celestial body, but as a cage, a seal. And she felt the beings who watched from beyond it, their thoughts like grinding glaciers, their intentions as cold and sterile as the void of space. They were not evil. They were order. And humanity, with its wars, its pain, and its gods in the making like Naruto and Nagato, was a symptom of chaos. A flaw to be corrected. An error to be erased. The vision ended. The pressure receded. Nagato was trembling, silent tears streaming down his skeletal face. His pain, his lifelong ambition, his grand plan for peace, it all seemed so small now. So insignificant. A squabble between ants, unaware of the boot that was about to descend. They are real? Nagato whispered, his voice broken. They are, Naruto confirmed. Your plan was to create a weapon to scare humanity into peace. My burden is to become a weapon to fight the gods who would unmake us all. Your war is with men. My war is with reality itself. Now tell me, Nagato, which is the truer path to peace? Conan looked at Naruto, truly seeing him for the first time. He was not just a Jinchuriki. He was not just a powerhouse. He was their world's only, terrifying answer to a question they had never even known to ask. He was shouldering a burden that would have crushed any of the Hokage, any man, in history. And he was doing it alone. Her path became clear. Yahiko's dream of peace through understanding had failed. Nagato's dream of peace through pain had been a perversion. Naruto's path, peace through absolute, unwavering strength that could shield the entire world, it was the only way. Nagato looked at his hands, then at Naruto. A genuine, peaceful smile touched his lips for the first time in decades. You are the one Jiraiya-sensei spoke of, the child of prophecy. He began to form a hand seal. I have used my power to cause so much pain. Let me use it one last time, for your cause. Nagato, no, Conan cried, knowing what jutsu was coming. It is all right, Conan, he said, his voice serene. My path ends here, but yours is to follow him. He is the dawn. He clasped his hands together, art of Rinne rebirth. But the wave of life-giving energy did not just flow back to Konoha. Nagato, with his last ounce of will, focused it. A portion of it swept over the village, a warm, healing light that mended the wounded and stabilized the dying. But the bulk of it, the massive life force of an Uzumaki, flowed into the one person beside him. It poured into Conan. Her paper wings solidified, taking on a pearlescent, ethereal sheen. Her chakra reserves swelled to a cage-level magnitude. Her eyes glowed with a faint purple light as she inherited the last vestiges of Nagato's power. He had not just died, he had passed his torch, creating a new, powerful guardian to stand at Naruto's side. Nagato's body crumbled to dust, a peaceful smile on his face. Conan knelt, no longer an enemy, but a knight before her new king. My life, and the entirety of Omegakure, are yours to command, Naruto-sama. Naruto returned to the Hokage Tower with Conan at his side. He stood before his court, his chosen few. The guardian unit Sasuke, Sakura, Hinata, Zabuza, and Haku stood ready. Tsunade, Jiraiya, Kakashi, and the heads of the great clans were assembled. They were the new leadership of Konoha, the war council for a battle they were only just beginning to comprehend. The mood was not one of celebration. It was one of sober, grim purpose. The Akatsuki had been broken. Their leader was dead, but a far greater shadow now loomed. Naruto looked at them all, his family, his court. His eyes, for a moment, seemed to glow with that soft, primordial blue light. The Akatsuki was a symptom, a fever born of a sick and broken world, he said, his voice resonating with a power that filled the room. We have treated the symptom. But the disease remains. The true threat does not care about our villages, our ambitions, or our pain. They see us as an error to be corrected. He turned and looked out the window, up at the night sky, at the brilliant, full moon. Our war with the shadows is over, he declared. Now, the real war begins. A war against the heavens themselves. As he spoke, something impossible happened. Visible only to those with the most heightened senses, to Naruto's primordial awareness, to Sasuke's Mangekyo Sharingan, which had awakened in the stress of the invasion, to Hinata's Byakugan. A thin, golden crack of light split the surface of the moon. It blazed for a fraction of a second, a celestial wound in the sky, before healing itself as if it had never been. The message was clear. Unmistakable. The gods now knew they were being watched back. Chapter 6 End.